Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take complex source materials, books, articles, deep research, and we really just boil them down to the most critical knowledge for you. Our mission is to give you that shortcut to being incredibly well-informed.
And today we're tackling a big one. This isn't just a single idea, it's an entire alternative framework for history. We're focusing on the foundational material from what we're calling the English BookCast.
That's right. The book is Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids, The Fall of the Tartarian Empire. It's by Guy Anderson, just published in 2024. And that title alone, it tells you we're in for a ride.
For sure. And the dedication right at the start, it sets a very serious tone. It's for the investigators of Tartaria, the people who, often face ridicule but are determined to bring this story into the mainstream. We're going to honor that by really digging into these first 4 chapters.
Okay, let's unpack this because the core premise is just massive. Right out of the gate, the author claims a global reset happened in 1776.
And not just a reset, but one with a very specific goal.
To, and this is a quote, wipe the Tartarian Empire off the face of the earth.
Exactly. And the author frames this not just as, some historical event. It's an active, ongoing conspiracy. It involves global elites, who he calls the parasites, and the systematic destruction of free knowledge and technology.
So for today, we're sticking to the foundation, chapters 1 through 4.
Yep. We're going to cover the manipulated timeline, identify who these elites supposedly are, define the Tartarian Empire itself, and then look at the, frankly, stunning architectural evidence they left behind.
All right, chapter 1. The author anchors everything to that one year, 1776.
That date is the hinge. Obviously, everyone knows it as the founding of America, but the book immediately says, hey, look at the back of a dollar bill. What do you see?
MDCCLX66.
Right, 1776, at the base of the pyramid. And right above it, Novus Ordo Seclorum.
Which translates to New World Order or New Order of the Ages.
Precisely. So the author sees this as a clear signal, but it wasn't just America.
What else was happening in 1776, according to the book?
It's presented as a coordinated, 3-pronged event. First, America's founding. Second, the creation of the Illuminati, the secret society everyone's heard of. And third, and this is crucial, the global introduction of maritime law.
Okay, we have to pause there. Maritime law. For people who aren't familiar, what does that mean in this context? Why is that so important?
So this is fundamental to the entire theory of control. Historically, most places operated under common law. You're an individual, you have natural rights. Simple.
The law of the land.
Exactly. Maritime law, or admiralty law, is the law of the sea. It deals with commerce, with contracts, with vessels. The theory is that by imposing maritime law over the land, the elite turned every single person into a corporate entity.
Not a sovereign being, but a piece of property.
A vessel.
A vessel born into debt and subject to commercial rules. That's how they started generating wealth through taxation and ownership. It was the legal mechanism to enslave the population without them even realizing it.
Wow. And the author's personal journey into all this, his rabbit hole moment, was much more recent. Oh yeah, it was the COVID-19 pandemic. He talks about being forced to wear face masks, the rollout of trial vaccines, and maybe most importantly, this cultural pressure to not question the science.
That was the breaking point for him.
It was. It made him ask that critical question. Who benefits from this? And he concluded that the people pushing this modern agenda, the World Economic Forum, the parasites, were just running a playbook.
So the Great Reset we hear about now is just another version of what happened in 1776.
That's the idea. It's just a modern iteration of the same control system put in place 250 years ago.
But he goes even deeper than that. It's not just about politics. It's about time itself.
Right. And this is where it gets really wild. The central claim is that the Vatican and the Jesuits intentionally added about 800 years to our historical timeline, sometime before that 1776 reset.
800 years. That changes everything. Roman history, Egyptian history, all of it would be fundamentally wrong.
It would all be wrong. And the way they did it, according to the source, was by inventing the Dark Ages.
So the Dark Ages never actually happened.
The theory is no. It was just a convenient 800-year blank spot on the calendar that the Vatican used to hide a huge chunk of real history. It made their own institutions seem much older and more legitimate than they actually were.
Who else supports this idea? The book mentions some pretty big names.
It does. The main modern proponent is a Russian mathematician, Anatoly Fomenko, a respected scientist who wrote, 22 books on this, arguing the math and astronomy of the official timeline just don't add up.
But then the claims get even bigger.
Yeah, and this is where you have to just report what the source says.
Yeah.
The author alleges that Albert Einstein believed 800 years were added. And even more dramatically, that Charles Darwin confessed on his deathbed that he didn't believe his own theories and was actually paid by the Vatican to create them.
That is a world-changing accusation. Does the book offer up, like, a letter or hard proof for that?
It presents these as known facts within the alternative history community it's speaking to. It puts them alongside someone like Isaac Newton, who we know for a fact did publish his own alternative timeline, The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms Amended.
Right, which mainstream history has pretty much dismissed.
Dismissed entirely. So the author's point is that questioning the timeline isn't new. Some of the greatest minds have done it.
Okay, so if you're going to fake 800 years of history, how do you make it stick? How do you cement that lie?
The mechanism has a name, the Scaligerian chronology. It was created by a Jesuit named Joseph Gallagher in the 16th and 17th centuries, basically building the historical framework we all learn in school today.
And to back it up, they introduced dating techniques that the author says are flawed.
Deeply flawed. Things like dendrochronology counting tree rings and radiocarbon dating. The argument is, if your starting point, your entire timeline, is already wrong by 800 years, then any dating method you use is just going to confirm the lie.
It becomes a self-perpetuating cycle.
Exactly. Any new find is automatically dated based on the wrong baseline, so it fits perfectly into the fake history.
And the book points out some pretty major inconsistencies, even in the mainstream version.
Oh, absolutely. Like, the date for the founding of the Roman Empire varies by 500 years, depending on which historical text you read.
500 years, that's not a small discrepancy.
It's huge. And then there's the text Roman History by Titus Livius, published in 1469 AD. The author claims it has a 500-year gap in it, just missing, which was then filled with portraits of people who, he says, never even existed.
And this isn't just a European problem.
No, it's global. The dating for the Egyptian pharaoh Menes swings wildly between 500-702 BC and 300-623 BC. The point is, any history before about 800 AD is incredibly difficult to substantiate. It's mushy.
This manipulation of time then leads right into the next big puzzle, the explosion of technology. The official story is we went from horse and buggy to life-changing inventions almost overnight in the 1800s.
It really is suspicious when you lay it out. The first train in 1804, then suddenly, around 1876, you get the telephone and the modern car. The light bulb in 78, power tools in 95. How? Where did all that knowledge come from all at once?
Which brings us to the architecture, the most visible, undeniable evidence.
This is the big one. You've got hundreds of massive, ornate cathedrals and government buildings all over the world. Perfect symmetry, often aligned to stars like Orion's belt.
Built without power tools, without cranes, without modern communication to coordinate it all.
And they all share this same Greco-Roman style. How is that possible?
The Tartarian solution explains it.
It does. The theory is that all this technology, free energy, even electric cars already existed. It belonged to the Tartarian Empire. The stuff we saw in the 1800s wasn't an invention. It was a rediscovery or a rebranding of their lost tech.
The book also points to the calendar shift as more proof. The Gregorian calendar from 1582.
Right, Pope Gregory III. The official story is it was just a minor correction for leap years, but the author highlights the cultural fallout.
April Fool's Day.
Exactly. The idea is that the old New Year was on April 1st. When the calendar changed, people who stuck to the old date were mocked as April Fools. It suggests the change was forced on people.
And there's evidence of a completely different calendar system before that.
A 13-month calendar with a midsummer month called Sol. That implies a totally different understanding of time. One that was based on natural cycles, not commercial ones.
Okay, let's talk about the physical clues in the buildings themselves. The author says there are signs of tampering everywhere.
The first one is just linguistic. When you see old plaques that say a building was established or founded on a certain date, not built.
The author thinks that means the new rulers, the parasites, just took over an existing building.
That's the theory. They founded their new institution in a pre-existing Tartarian structure.
But the most fascinating idea is about the dates themselves being physically changed, carved right into the stone.
This is so specific. The idea is that on many old buildings, you'll see a date like, say, 1469, but the number 1 at the beginning looks off. It's misaligned or carved differently.
And the theory is that it wasn't originally a 1.
It was originally the letter J, or I, standing for Jesus, or Isis, or Isa, and that letter was just slightly modified to look like a 1, which instantly pushed the building's date forward by 1,000 years.
So a building from, say, I-469 becomes 1469.
And just like that, you've created 1,000 years of fake history, and hidden the true age of the structure. It was a simple, brilliant way to support the fake timeline.
And this gets applied directly to colonial histories, like in Australia.
The Australian example is devastating for the official narrative. The story is Sydney was built starting in 1788 by convicts who just so happened to be master stonemasons.
Right. Let's break down how impossible that sounds.
Yeah, the credited architect, a guy named Mortimer Lewis, was 8 years old in 1788, and he only arrived in Australia as a convict in 1829. Another key figure, Colonel George Barney, wasn't even born yet.
So how does official history explain a city being built by architects who weren't there?
It doesn't really, and the final nail in the coffin is a painting from 1824 by Joseph Lycett. It shows Sydney as a fully built-up, sophisticated city with huge Greco-Roman buildings and church spires.
There's no way a group of convicts with basic tools built all of that in just 36 years.
The author's conclusion is simple. The city was already there. It was a Tartarian city. The convict story was just a cover to explain away the magnificent buildings they found.
Okay, that brings us to Chapter 2. We've talked about the what, the lie. Now we get to the who, the elite, or as the author calls them, the parasitic race.
It's a very harsh term, but he uses it in a biological sense. An organism that lives at the expense of its host, which is, the general population. They don't create, they just extract.
And how do they do that? What's the mechanism?
It's about owning everything that's essential. They get into positions of power royalty, government, corporations, and they take control of gas, oil, food, and pharmaceuticals. The system is designed so that no matter what you do, they profit.
And they actively suppress anything that threatens that model.
The book gives a perfect example. The conspiracy between Henry Ford and John D. Rockefeller about 100 years ago.
Over electric cars.
Over electric cars, which were getting really popular back then. We forget that. There were electric taxis in New York in 1894. The Victoria Phaeton model had a 100-mile range.
So what happened?
Ford had the combustion engine. Rockefeller had the oil. Electric cars, which run on free or cheap energy, were a threat to both of them. So they allegedly conspired to ban them or push them out of the market to ensure we'd be dependent on oil for the next century.
That's a perfect example of what the author calls the gamekeeper and poacher strategy.
It's the perfect closed loop. They fund both sides of a war. They own the junk food companies that make you sick, and they own the pharmaceutical companies that sell you the cure. The goal isn't health. It's the perpetual management of sickness. They profit from the problem and the solution.
This leads to the very top of the pyramid, the Crown Council of 13.
Right. This is supposedly the real ruling body of the world. 13 specific bloodline families, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, DuPonts, names you'd recognize.
And at the very top,
A family called the Orsinists, with Pepe Orsini, the head of the Jesuits, acting as the world monarch. So it's not just financial power, it's ancient religious and institutional power.
and the lineage of these families, especially the Rothschilds, is traced back to something not quite human.
This is where the theory goes deep. The author claims they descend from Amun-Ra, or Marduk, an Egyptian deity figure, and he, in turn, descends from Enki, one of the Anunnaki who supposedly created mankind.
So these 13 bloodlines see themselves as literal descendants of gods, a hybrid race.
That's the idea. And the name Rothschild itself is supposedly a clue. Amun-Ra's kingdom was left to his Rarakam, which means child. Over time, that became Raychilds and then Rothschilds. Their power isn't earned, it's an ancient inherited right.
The book also makes a startling connection to the word amen.
Yeah, the claim is that when you say amen at the end of a prayer, you are unknowingly paying tribute to Amun-Ra, who the book describes as a vile and brutal ruler. It's a form of subconscious linguistic control.
And there's a supposed genetic marker for this bloodline.
The Rh-negative blood type. It's relatively rare and lacks the protein factor found in most of humanity, which is linked to the rhesus monkey. In this theory, Rh-negative blood is the sign of their Anunnaki heritage.
And they keep it in the family.
They rarely marry outside the group to preserve that genetic marker. It reinforces their belief that they are fundamentally different and superior to the host population they rule over.
So, Chapter 3. We shift from the parasites to the empire they destroyed. What was Tartaria actually like?
The scale of it, if this is true, is just mind-boggling. The empire, known as Great Tartary, covered Russia, most of Asia, and according to the author, stretched all the way to the east coast of America. It was a truly global civilization.
And much more recent than we think.
Far more recent. The population in just the Russian and Asian parts was around 8 million, so erasing them from history was a huge systematic project. The author claims, for example, that the Mongolian Empire was actually just a part of the Tartarian Empire that got rebranded.
And events like Pugachev's uprising in the late 1700s were used as an excuse to wipe them off the maps.
That was a key moment. After that, mapmakers started replacing Great Tartary with names like Persia, or changing Chinese Tartary to Manchuria. Within a few decades, the word Tartaria was just gone from public maps.
But the proof is still there if you look in older books.
Exactly. The author finds these little breadcrumbs. A book called History in a Changing World has the line, "Scratch a Russian and you will find a Tartar." Another one, The Story of England, talks about the savage horde of savage Tartars.
And Marco Polo talks about them constantly.
All the time. His travels are full of references to the dominion of the Tartars. He even talks about buying Tartaria cloth. He's describing a living, breathing, massive empire.
What about the name itself, Tartaria?
It has a double meaning. It can mean Tartar Aryans, but the author points out that in ancient scripture, it also means the world under the world.
Which is incredibly ironic given the mud-flood theory.
It's deeply ironic, the idea that the civilization was buried by a cataclysm, leaving their ground floors underground, literally creating a world under our world.
And their culture was based on a very different understanding of spirituality and energy.
Totally different. Those giant cathedrals weren't for worship in the way we think of it. They were meditation and healing centers. The buildings themselves were functional devices.
Tuned to a specific frequency.
The frequency for life, 432 hertz. The organ pipes, the bells, the very dimensions of the rooms were all designed to resonate at this healing frequency. Their religion was a mix of Mohammedanism and nature worship, but the buildings were technology.
Their medicine was also very different.
Very holistic. A lama, a Tibetan teacher, would diagnose you just by running his fingers over both your wrist pulses at the same time. The cure was usually simple, like pulped vegetables and water.
And they would beat the prescription.
Yeah, the prescription was written on a piece of paper and you'd eat the paper. The belief was that the intention and knowledge infused in the paper were just as powerful as the medicine.
Which speaks to a worldview where energy and intention are paramount.
Yeah.
Now, we have to talk about the giants. The architecture just doesn't make sense for people our size.
Right. The author says that while not all Tartarians were giants, some grew up to 12 feet tall, and the average height was an incredible 10 feet.
An average of 10 feet. That explains everything.
It explains the 20-foot-high doorways, the massive rooms, the windows you can't see out of. The buildings are the proof. They were built for and by much larger people.
And this connects to the story of the Moors in America.
It does. The book claims the Moors, described as the first natives of America, originally from Africa, arrived 180 years before Columbus. And they were the ones who built the Greco-Roman Tartarian architecture across the Americas.
So the White House, the Capitol buildings, those are Tartarian structures.
Built by the Moors, according to this theory. The book even says San Francisco was the western capital of the Tartarian Empire. It completely rewrites the entire history of the continent.
And there's one last strange data point about giants.
A really interesting one. The author notes that several famous modern giants like Robert Wadlow, Ballyhoo, Otto were all born right around the year 1910.
And he speculates that might have been the last year that Tartarian giants were born.
Like a genetic line that was finally fading out or being actively suppressed after that point?
Okay, Chapter 4. We're looking at the architecture itself and what it was really for. Let's start with cathedrals. The name itself is a clue.
It's the biggest clue. Cathedral comes from cathedral. A cathode is an electrode. The name literally tells you it's an electrical device.
So they weren't churches, they were power stations.
Exactly. Power stations that harness two types of energy. Telluric energy, which is the natural electricity in the ground, and aether energy from the atmosphere. They amplified it using cymatic shapes in the windows and arches.
So the spires were basically antennae.
You can see it. The objects on top of the spires look just like the equipment on modern electricity pylons. The author asks, why would every continent build the exact same style of power station unless it was part of one unified, global, free energy grid?
And the reset in 1776 was about dismantling that grid.
It was. The Vatican took over the buildings, and the book specifically names J.D. Rockefeller as the one who had the key components, the cathodes, the coils removed. Then he lobbied to make free energy illegal, ensuring we'd have to pay for his oil instead.
Churches had a different but related function.
Churches were purely healing centers. They used sound and color.
The frequency shift. This is a huge part of the theory.
It's one of the most sinister claims. The original organ pipes and bells were all tuned to that healing frequency, 432 hertzes. Around 1940, Rockefeller and his group had it changed to 440 hertz.
And 440 hertz is considered a dissonant, anxiety-inducing frequency.
Exactly. It creates emotional and spiritual disharmony, making people easier to control.
What was the cover story for changing every bell and organ in the world?
World War II. The claim is they used the war as an excuse to confiscate the old bells, saying they needed the metal for ammunition. But then they were immediately replaced with new bells made of the same material, just tuned to the new, lower frequency.
And the stained glass windows were part of the healing, too.
They weren't just glass, they were made of crystals. Each color corresponded to a different chakra, and the light passing through them was meant to heal the body. Those were all replaced with plain-colored glass.
There's also the pine cone symbolism everywhere.
Yep, you see pine cones all over church architecture. It's a symbol for the pineal gland, the third eye, which is central to spiritual awareness and the body's healing systems. It's another clue to their original purpose.
And then there's the story of how they disabled the copper domes.
This is one of the weirdest, most specific details. The copper domes were shiny, conductive parts of the energy system. To shut them down, the book claims they were coated in horse urine.
Horse urine.
To rapidly oxidize the copper and turn it that dull, non-conductive green color we see today. A crude but effective way to turn off the power.
Finally, we have the star forts. These are visually stunning.
They're incredible. There are 319 of them left. Fort McHenry, Palmanova in Italy, they're all perfectly symmetrical, always near water, and built with sacred geometry, often aligned to constellations.
The official story is that they were designed to deflect cannonballs.
Which the author says is absurd. Their complexity is way beyond what's needed for defense. The theory is they were independent ecosystems, using water and aether to generate a healing frequency of 528 hertz. They were basically hospitals.
And building them would have been impossible with the technology of the time.
Absolutely. The level of symmetry and precision, especially in the star shapes, would require an aerial view. You couldn't do it from the ground. It implies they had airships or some other advanced technology.
And their true purpose has been hidden.
Deliberately. The first major book on them didn't come out until 1970, and it relied on information from private organizations and the Smithsonian Institution, which is a huge red flag for anyone in this field of research. They were rebranded as military forts to hide their true Tartarian function.
So what we're left with is this cohesive narrative where all these disparate clues, the date 1776, the shape of a cathedral, the layout of a star fort, all point to one thing: a global, advanced empire that was wiped out.
It's a complete, all-encompassing framework. We've talked about the reset, the fake timeline with Fomenko and the Jesuits, the parasitic elite with their supposed Anunnaki bloodline, the sheer scale of Tartaria, and the incredible technology hidden in their architecture.
And we really have only just scratched the surface here, which leaves a final thought. If this advanced technology and free energy were destroyed to keep us under control, what does that say about the technology we use and pay for every single day?
That's the question you have to ask yourself. If the goal was never progress, but control, then maybe the whole system we live in, paying for energy, for medicine, for knowledge, is just the system the parasites built after they destroyed a much better one. Was Tartaria the last time humanity was truly free?
Next time, our deep dive is going to continue right where we left off. We're jumping into Chapter 5, Lost Tartarian Technology. We'll be talking about Nikola Tesla, his suppressed work, and the true nature of the aether that powered this entire lost world. You are not going to want to miss it.
Until then, keep digging and keep questioning.
We'll see you next time.
Continuing our analysis, last time we began charting the initial rise and really the incredible global influence of the supposed forgotten superpower, Tartaria.
We did. We laid the groundwork.
Today, however, we turn to a much darker, much more explosive section of the source material. We are diving deep into 4 consecutive chapters that they lay out the very foundation of the claim that our established history was violently reset.
And not just reset, but comprehensively rewritten by a highly coordinated elite.
Exactly.
So our mission for you, the listener, today is to systematically understand the core mechanisms of this claimed destruction. We are specifically analyzing chapters 5 through 8, which really detail the final collapse of this global civilization.
And there's a single idea that runs through all of it, isn't there?
There is, and it's stark. The sources argue that the fall of Tartaria was not a slow decline, not some, natural geopolitical transition.
No.
It was a systematic, highly coordinated global operation. It was carried out by a specific group, which the sources consistently refer to as the parasites, to seize absolute control.
Control over everything.
Over technology, global finance, and the established historical narrative itself.
And we are talking about a full spectrum takedown here, covering everything from physics to warfare. We're going to examine some startling claims regarding the systematic theft and suppression of free energy system.
The use of geophysical warfare, even directed energy weapons to reshape the planet.
Then there's the alleged true motives behind the world's most brutal conflicts, and finally the colossal effort to hide or repurpose this magnificent global architecture.
So let's not waste any time. We should start with Chapter 5, focusing on the technology that made Tartarian Empire so powerful it apparently had to be destroyed.
Right. So this chapter asserts that to understand Tartaria, you have to first understand their power source. They were the empire of free energy.
And the claim is extremely radical. It suggests that the modern narrative we accept about technological advancement, over the last 150 years or so, it's essentially a thin, fabricated veil.
A cover story.
It covers up a massive, globally coordinated technological suppression campaign designed primarily to benefit emerging fossil fuel interests.
And the sources name names, don't they? Specifically, the Rockefeller and Rothschild family interests.
They do. And they immediately tie this technological theft directly to a figure we all know.
Nikola Tesla.
Nikola Tesla. We're taught he was this brilliant, eccentric inventor. But the narrative here suggests that his breakthrough work, specifically the invention of alternating current, AC, and the Tesla coil in 1891.
Yes.
It was less an invention from scratch and more a rediscovery.
A rediscovery of an existing, suppressed, and far superior Tartarian energy network.
Precisely. Tesla didn't invent the system. He cracked the code of a system that had been operational for centuries.
So these original Tartarian power stations, what did they look like? The source is very specific about this.
They were not ugly, coal-belching factories. They were the stunning monolithic structures we still see dominating city skylines today.
You mean the cathedrals?
The massive cathedrals, temples, government halls, all those large municipal buildings. The claim is that these structures weren't primarily places of worship.
They were functional.
They were highly functional, purpose-built energy antenna and generators. And they were constructed using specific advanced architectural principles known as esoteric architecture and cymatics.
Okay, let's unpack those terms quickly because they are crucial to how this power mechanism supposedly worked. We need to know how this architecture generated power.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The architecture wasn't just for looks. It wasn't just aesthetic. Esoteric architecture refers to building geometries, spires, domes, specific ratios, all designed to harmonize with and amplify natural planetary frequencies.
And cymatics, that's the study of visible sound and vibration, right?
That's it. So the sources argue that these cathedral structures, through their intricate shapes and massive resonant internal spaces, they actively captured and converted ambient planetary vibrations acoustic resonance into usable electrical energy.
So the churches were essentially giant, high-efficiency sonic transducers.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So if the building itself was the frame, the resonator, what were the internal components that turned all that resonance into mass power?
We are looking for a few key technical components that were, according to the sources, systematically removed during the suppression.
Okay.
First, the antenna at the top, typically a spire or a copper dome, that's what received the energy. This then led down to a resonator.
And what was that like?
It was often an intricate system of coils, pipes, sometimes even organ-like structures inside the building, which amplified the captured energy. And critically, there was the capacitor.
The capacitor.
This was often described as a large tank, frequently filled with a mysterious substance called red mercury.
Red mercury. That name pops up all the time in these suppressed technology stories. Why red mercury? What did the sources claim it actually did?
So the sources claim that red mercury, or mercury antimony oxide, possibly stabilized with uranium, was the key component that made the whole system universally clean and efficient.
How so?
It was described as a highly stable superconducting material that acted as a massive energy sink. Chemically unique, it could stabilize and store incredibly high charges of telluric energy.
Which is the natural electric current flowing beneath the Earth.
Right. And at the same time, it amplified the captured etheric resonance from the atmosphere.
So it's pulling energy from above and below.
Exactly. And once that energy was stored, it was then transmitted wirelessly through the air or through these subsurface metal grids embedded in the city roads to smaller antenna on every home, vehicle, and tram.
That immediately raises a question for me. If this component, red mercury, was so vital and rare, what happened to it once the so-called parasites seized control of the power stations? Was it just destroyed?
The material alleges it was largely stolen. Given its unique properties, especially its purported role in stabilization and possibly even radiation containment, the sources suggest two primary fates.
What are they?
One, it was reverse engineered for clandestine military applications, and that might be related to the advanced weaponry we're going to discuss in Chapter 6.
And the second fate?
Its very existence was suppressed. Because any substance capable of storing and stabilizing clean, free energy was an existential threat to the emerging oil and coal monopolies. Simple as that.
I also recall the sources pointing out that the very look of many of these larger power-generating structures was functional, not just aesthetic. The brickwork.
That's the red and white brickwork detail? It wasn't accidental. The sources claim this intentional two-tone design made the structure resemble a modern battery due to a deliberate practical application of chemistry. The pigment in those red bricks was believed to contain iron or other compounds that, when exposed to the high electromagnetic fields generated by the cymatic system, facilitated a chemical reaction similar to rust, but one that actively aided in storing and conducting localized electrical charge. It was essentially a self-charging building envelope.
This speaks to a deep, practical understanding of physics that is just, well, it's far beyond our accepted 19th century knowledge. But the true genius, as you mentioned earlier, was the free aspect, and that all derived from this concept of the ether.
Yes. Tartarian power was fundamentally clean, free, and endlessly renewable because it drew power from the ether, a concept that Tartarian physicists completely embraced.
And the ether was what? Exactly.
It was believed to be the non-material vibrating medium that permeated all of space, the very fabric of reality, which could be tapped for infinite energy.
And this is where the suppression moves from just theft to calculated denial. I find the shift in the definition of ether, as documented by the sources, particularly damning to the established narrative.
It really highlights the intentional philosophical erasure, doesn't it? The material points out that up until the early 20th century, the ether was generally accepted in scientific circles.
It wasn't some fringe idea.
Not at all. For instance, the 1933 Oxford English Dictionary described the ether as an elastic solid of an electric medium, clearly acknowledging its tangible material reality and its role in electricity.
What, today?
Today, mainstream science universally dismisses it as merely a conceptual gas or a theoretical non-entity. It's been stripped of all practical application.
A dismissal which served the financial agenda perfectly.
Perfectly.
Wait, if this technology was fully functional and essentially unlimited, drawing profit from fossil fuels wasn't just harder, it was functionally impossible. You mentioned the Rockefeller and Freemason lobbies. How did they legally kill free energy?
The material asserts they were the core of these parasites. They successfully lobbied and bought off governments, particularly in the U.S., to make any widespread use of free etheric energy financially non-viable or just outright illegal.
So what was the first step?
Their first step after the military seizure of the Tartarian structures was systematic reverse engineering and dismantlement. They stole the blueprints, they removed the vital cathodes and coils from the cathedrals,
And then replaced the Tartarian system.
replaced it with the centralized, debt-based system of metered, fossil fuel-generated AC power that we have today.
And the sources claim this suppression even extended to the sonic environment, specifically citing the alteration of church bells.
This is a really important detail about psychological control. The claim is that the original bells, the chimes, the massive organ pipes in these Tartarian structures were tuned to 432 hertz.
And that frequency is significant because
It's a frequency long believed to resonate with living matter, promoting healing, mental clarity, and even euphoria. The sources allege these were replaced by the parasites with instruments tuned to the current standard of 440 hertz.
a frequency that the sources alleged is the opposite.
Yes, that it induces despair, promotes conflict, and suppresses cognitive and spiritual function, thereby ensuring a subdued and compliant population for this new world order. Many of the original bells were allegedly destroyed during the World Wars or just melted down.
So, Tartaria was dismantled not just technologically, but spiritually and psychologically. But the suppression went much further than fixed electricity. You mentioned that free travel was a core Tartarian ethos.
Absolutely. Look at their transportation. The sources claim Tartarian cities utilized wireless trams, powered by massive metal grids laid just beneath the city roads.
Which means no tracks, no overhead cables.
Exactly. Just quiet, clean transit. And on the seas, they mastered something called magnetricity, harnessing electromagnetic energy derived from simple, clean saltwater electrolysis to power ships.
Again, completely clean and free.
Completely. And the massive suppression of this mobility, the sources argue, is evidenced by the invention of the modern passport initiative.
Which was brought in specifically to restrict the globally free movement that Tartarian citizens enjoyed.
That's the claim. The idea that the passport exists only to control movement, not for security, is a classic conspiracy claim. But when you contrast it with a worldwide free wireless transport system, the motive becomes much clearer.
Let's talk about domestic life and the claim that their heating systems eliminated the need for continuous eating. That's a massive claim that needs more detail.
It is, and it radically changes how we view their biology and their architecture. The material suggests that the elaborate fireplaces you see in old world structures were not for burning wood.
They were for energy transference.
Exactly. They utilized the energy harvested by the rooftop antenna, bouncing highly ionized air between two metallic goblets or poles inside the hearth, with the energy stored via a radium backplate.
So the chimney was just ventilation for this ionized air, not smoke exhaust.
That's the theory.
And how does that relate to sustenance and waste? It seems like a leap.
Well, the energy output was allegedly powerful and constant enough to maintain the body's core temperature and metabolic needs efficiently. The sources claim this wireless energy-based heating system dramatically reduced the need for continuous caloric intake.
Meaning citizens didn't need to eat or drink nearly as often for sustenance?
Right, and this provides a very unusual explanation for a common architectural anomaly. The source points out the remarkable lack of toilets, sophisticated waste pipes, and sewers in most recovered Old World structures.
Because metabolic waste was dramatically reduced, making complex plumbing redundant.
That's the incredible conclusion they draw. It ties the technology directly into an architectural absence.
The sources also listed several other prototypes that were functional and then suppressed.
We see the prototypes for so many modern items. They document pneumatic underground trains running on compressed air, electric cars that were widely popular in the late 1800s, like the Victoria Phaeton.
Before they were suddenly banned in favor of gasoline.
Exactly. And even rudimentary mobile telephones. The homophone, for instance, was an early mobile device that allegedly connected to an electric charge running through the fire hydrant water supply lines.
Using water as a transmission medium.
Yes, using the highly conductive properties of water to act as a localized transmission medium, sometimes even using an umbrella or walking stick as an external antenna.
That's amazing.
And finally, automatons, or simple robots, were used extensively for labor, reducing the need for manual servitude. The fact that entire fleets of silent electric taxis were operational in New York City in the late 1800s, only to be systematically crushed by the emerging oil interests, supports the argument that the technology was widespread and functional.
It paints a detailed picture of a technological paradise that was intentionally dismantled and erased for profit. The context is only compounded by artifacts like the Baghdad battery, which dates back 2,000 years.
Predating the Tartarian era itself.
Right, which underscores that sophisticated energy technology is ancient and its suppression is a long-standing practice.
What's fascinating here is the sheer audacity of the theft. The parasites didn't just steal technology, they stole the concept of clean, free, sustainable living.
And replaced it.
Replaced it with a system based on debt, taxation, and resource dependency, a system that maximizes corporate wealth and minimizes public freedom. The transition from free energy to fossil fuel slavery, the sources argue, was the foundational brutal act of the Great Reset.
That brutality brings us directly to Chapter 6, which transitions from organized technological theft to outright mass-scale physical destruction. If the Tartarian system was to be erased, the source suggests it required a convergence of massive, world-altering catastrophes.
Some natural, but others clearly engineered by those who inherited the advanced weaponry.
Right, and the primary cosmic marker for this destruction is the appearance and long duration of the Comet of 1811.
This was a multifaceted cataclysmic event. The comet lasted an astonishing 17 months, and upon entry into the atmosphere, the sources claim it broke up into an estimated 200 massive meteors.
The period was marked by terrifying global events. I remember reading about eyewitness accounts of the sun turning black for days due to atmospheric debris.
Exactly. And the material also links this specific catastrophe to a 2065-year destructive cycle predicted in the ancient Book of Enoch.
Which suggests the parasites may have known this cosmic reset event was coming and used it as cover.
That's the chilling implication. And immediately following this cosmic event came the synchronized earthly destruction, specifically mass global fires.
Correct. The sources allege that following the initial impact events, and aided by the chaos and debris, a series of massive city-leveling fires occurred almost simultaneously worldwide.
This was not localized damage.
Not at all. The material cites specific, massive examples. Moscow and Washington, D.C. both burned extensively in 1812. New York was hit in 1835. Copenhagen in 1795.
The narrative strongly suggests these fires were not accidental. They weren't purely coincidental. They were part of the coordinated parasitic aim to wipe out the last visible infrastructure of the Tartarian Empire, using the Comet event as the perfect environmental pretext.
The scale required to level multiple global cities simultaneously strongly implies the use of weaponry far beyond conventional 19th century cannons or muskets.
It leads to the terrifying possibility that advanced technology was immediately weaponized by the elite. The sources discuss scientific findings of nuclear glass.
Specifically trinitite, atomsite, or Alamogordo glass.
Yes, discovered in ancient deserts, including massive fields in Egypt. Trinitite, as we know, is famously formed by the extreme heat of nuclear detonation, like at the Trinity test site in 1945.
So the implication here is massive,
Yeah.
that atomic-level bombs or directed energy weapons DWs were used to destroy Tartaria long before the 1940s.
Exactly. The source suggests the scale of destruction across the Tartarian Empire prior to the mid-19th century involved these advanced weapons hitting key geographical targets that they hoped for to destroy Tartarian influence and energy technology pockets.
So the theory is that the parasites had access to some of this technology even before the mass collapse, or they quickly reverse-engineered enough of it to conduct a global cleanup campaign.
That seems to be the argument.
This level of cataclysmic impact naturally leads us to the most visible, persistent consequence of this claimed reset, the mud flood phenomenon.
This is a direct geological consequence of the combined events, comets, bombs, and massive tectonic shifts. The 1812 New Madrid earthquake, for instance, was cited as an immense geophysical event.
So powerful that the material claims it caused metal objects to fly through the air and stick together due to magnetic pull.
And famously caused the Mississippi River to temporarily reverse its flow by 180 degrees. These seismic and celestial events, combined with the resulting floods, caused a literal deluge across the world.
But the mud flood isn't just regular flood damage, is it? The sources describe a torrent of incredibly dense material.
It was far more destructive. The mud flood involved rivers of silt, rock, and even melted rocks soaring through cities, burying the landscape with up to 20 feet of debris.
And once this material settled and hardened, often acting like concrete, it permanently raised the ground level of every major city globally.
Yes, and this process, the sources argue, created distinct, globally visible architectural anomalies that researchers point to as concrete evidence of the reset.
And what should listeners specifically look for in their own cities to spot a buried Tartarian structure based on the material?
Look at any pre-1800s building that looks disproportionately sunk into the ground. You will invariably find mud flood windows.
Basement windows that are half covered, or sometimes entirely covered, by the modern pavement or sidewalk.
Exactly. Often, only the top arc of the window is visible above the street level. Furthermore, look at buildings that have elaborate staircases leading up to what we call the ground floor.
The sources argue these steps were hastily added because the original ground floor doors were buried too low to use,
Forcing builders to convert the original first-floor windows into new, elevated doorways. The basement level we see today was, in fact, the original street-level ground floor of the Tartarian era.
That explains why modern archaeology requires digging so deeply to find structures supposedly from ancient times. They're simply digging past the mudflood layer.
Precisely. And this wasn't a slow geological process. The sources describe it as a devastating, acute series of disasters, suggesting that the event buried the world in a relatively short time frame.
They give an example, don't they?
They cite the Great California Mud Flood of 1862, following a massive warm storm that melted mountain snow. It was a deluge that washed away entire towns, vehicles, and people. The consistency of these mud flood signs, from the U.S. to Europe to Russia, strongly supports the notion of a coordinated global reset event rather than disparate local accidents.
If the Tartarians were physically scorched and silted out of existence in the early 1800s, Chapter 7 claims that the subsequent human conflicts, the Napoleonic Wars, the Civil Wars, and especially the World Wars, were engineered specifically to finish the job.
Engineered to serve the elite's agenda for total demographic, historical, and resource control. The overarching motive presented in this material is chillingly simple.
Which is?
War, in this new context, was never truly about peace, or national liberation, or ideological conflict in the way we are taught.
It was a tool.
It was, rather, a calculated tool for systematic destruction of remaining old-world infrastructure, the acquisition of global resources, oil, minerals, poppy fields, and most importantly, maintaining control by maximizing the wealth and power of the parasitic elite. They needed to eliminate not just the technology, but the memory and the people who held that memory.
Let's start with a claim the source makes that connects ancient history directly to modern conflict. The startling link between the discovery of the Gilgamesh tomb and the events leading up to the Iraq invasion.
This is perhaps one of the most radical historical claims in the book. The material alleges that in early 2003, an archaeologist named Jorg Fassbinder discovered the tomb of the legendary King Gilgamesh in Iraq.
And the description of the discovery is very specific.
Very. The occupant was allegedly a 12-foot giant, strikingly red-haired and draped in gold artifacts, suggesting physical proof of an Anunnaki human lineage.
And critically, that would definitively challenge and potentially debunk Darwin's entire evolutionary theory.
That's the earth-shattering claim, that the war on terror was pretext for erasing the discovery of a superior, non-Darwinian giant race.
Does the source material give us any indication of who specifically conducted this raid, beyond just the general military forces?
The source states that the invasion of Iraq following 9/11 was orchestrated, and one of the first, most successful strategic targets was the Gilgamesh tomb site. The material implies that elements within the military were deployed to erase this scientific and historical threat before it could become public knowledge.
So the true objective, it is argued, was to permanently wipe out the evidence of a superior, giant Tartarian-related race, thereby protecting the established narrative of human history.
And maintaining the perceived superiority of the new elite.
That's a profound pivot, that modern warfare is fundamentally a war on history and prehistory. Moving back chronologically, how did the early 19th century wars fit this massive demolition agenda?
The Napoleonic Wars from 1803 to 1815 and the War of 1812 are categorically described in the source material as acts of mass genocide.
Against who?
Against the surviving Tartarian people, the Moors, and indigenous populations globally. The conflicts were engineered to wipe out organized cultural and political resistance and dismantle their cities.
And they use Washington, D.C. as an example.
Yes, the near-total flattening of Washington during the War of 1812 is highlighted as a strategic act of wiping the old world culture and infrastructure off the map in North America.
With the notable exception of the White House and a few key structures, which were repurposed.
Exactly.
And the sources spend significant time dismantling the official causes of the 20th century world wars, connecting them directly back to the issue of free energy suppression we discussed earlier.
The claimed motive for World War I is deeply rooted in this technological conflict. The sources dismiss the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand as merely a convenient catalyst.
So what was the real cause, according to them?
They claim the real decision to initiate the war was made much earlier, allegedly in 1891, by a secretive group called the Society of the Elect, including figures linked to global finance like the Rothschilds and influential industrialists like Cecil Rhodes.
And why Germany? Why was Germany the target?
Because Germany, the sources argue, was becoming too technologically advanced. They were likely still utilizing, developing, or actively researching Tartarian free energy technology.
The wireless systems and magnetricity applications.
Yes, and this posed a direct existential threat to the parasite's burgeoning global oil and resource profits. World War I, therefore, was not a conflict about national defense. It was engineered by financial elites to crush this technologically superior rival and eliminate any widespread revival of free energy.
World War II then escalated this architectural and technological destruction exponentially, focusing on two specific types of targets that seemed illogical from a conventional military standpoint.
First, the intentional destruction of cultural centers, particularly the Dresden Massacre in February 1945.
And Dresden, the source notes, was a barely defended hospital city miles from any active front line.
It was sheltering 26,000 Allied POWs and hundreds of thousands of refugees, a civilian population twice its normal size. The sources argue the bombing had zero military justification.
It was specifically designed to target ancient cities, museums, libraries, and areas inhabited primarily by civilians, women, children, the elderly.
All to systematically remove traces of the old world and the Tartarian influence.
And the method of destruction used in Dresden, as described in the sources, was intended to be absolute.
The material focuses on the horrific efficiency of the operation, designed to erase physical matter entirely. Temperatures during the firestorm reached 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
And this intense directed heat created a massive fire vortex.
Yes, that literally sucked oxygen out of the air and pulled debris and people into the inferno. The claimed consequence of this extreme heat was that bodies in cellars where people had sought refuge were melted into pools of liquid fat, sometimes up to 12 inches deep.
It's just horrific.
This level of intentional, massive destruction of an architecturally and culturally unique city serves as the source's proof of a concerted effort to physically erase Tartarian history. They weren't fighting an enemy, they were cleaning up the evidence.
Then we have the ultimate demonstration of force: the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If the goal was simply to defeat Japan, why were these civilian islands chosen, especially since the war against Japan was largely considered effectively won by that point?
The source material posits a dual overlapping purpose for the atomic bombings, going beyond simple military strategy.
Okay.
One, undeniably, was the geopolitical demonstration to Russia of America's capabilities, fueling the start of the Cold War and securing U.S. global dominance.
And the second reason?
The second, and more relevant to our deep dive, was the need to destroy the remaining pockets of visible Tartarian technology that had survived the previous century of conflict and mud floods.
And what specific technology was allegedly targeted in Japan?
The sources claim that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were still actively utilizing Tartarian free energy infrastructure, specifically visible Tesla mast and wireless energy transmitters and receivers, which were potentially operational and could have inspired technological rivals.
So these free energy installations had to be permanently vaporized before the new centralized debt-based global order could be cemented.
That is the argument. The atomic bomb, therefore, served as the ultimate irreversible mechanism for historical and technological erasure.
So whether through strategic simultaneous fires, the burial of the mud flood, or the targeted use of global conflicts using advanced weaponry, the goal was consistently the same: erase the physical evidence of the advanced free energy civilization and its legacy.
Which brings us to the final, necessary step of the alleged reset: the grand cover-up of the magnificent Tartarian buildings that survived the fire, the flood, and the bombs. Chapter 8 details how history was fabricated and how the very architecture that survived was weaponized against the global population.
How were these magnificent structures hidden in plain sight, allowing the new elite to claim ownership of them?
The first method was pure efficiency: repurposing. Surviving structures became the central infrastructure of the New World Order.
They were converted into government offices, massive banks, military bases, prisons, and hospitals.
Exactly. Hidden in plain sight, often restricted from public access, or sometimes deliberately left to decay. And the source suggests these decaying structures were often slated for destruction via an accidental fire, allowing favored developers, typically linked to the financial elite, to seize the valuable central city land.
And to make this existing ancient architecture fit the newly fabricated 19th century timeline, the sources discuss the manipulation of construction dates carved into the stonework.
This specific detail is critical to the falsification of the timeline, and it's a brilliant piece of historical sleight of hand according to the material. The trick involved replacing or altering the first digit of the date carved into a building's cornerstone.
How did they do it?
Historically, the letter J, or I, representing Jesus, Isis, or Isa, was often used before the date of construction to denote the year of the Lord.
Okay.
To manufacture a later construction date, the sources allege the new ruling elite, often working with the Vatican, would simply claim the J or I was the number 1, or just add a Roman numeral M for ln 5, or the number 1 to the beginning of the date.
Thereby pushing the supposed construction year forward by a full millennium.
Just like that.
That implies that our entire historical understanding, particularly from the Middle Ages forward, could be off by 1,000 years. Was this manipulation flawlessly executed?
The material suggests it was not. And the source provides a powerful illustrative detail from Manti, Utah, where a grocery store still clearly displays the date 1880 carved into its foundation. Yes. So if we follow the theory that 1,000 years were added to the timeline, this date suggests the building was actually constructed in 1888, confirming the pattern of an artificially inflated calendar. It's cited as a key piece of physical evidence that the timeline shift was real but maybe hastily performed, leaving these easily identifiable gaps.
Let's look at the lie of colonization. Using the Australian example provided in the source material, we are taught that the early British settlements were built by petty criminals and convicts on a primitive land.
But the architectural evidence, according to the sources, completely defies this official narrative.
How so?
Consider the foundation of the first government house in Sydney, supposedly laid in 1788. The credited colonial architect, Mortimer Lewis, was only 8 years old in 1788.
Right.
And he only arrived in Australia as a convict in 1829. Colonel Barney, another credited friend, wasn't even born yet when some major construction was allegedly underway.
And yet, within a few decades of supposed settlement on a supposedly empty continent, vast complex cities like Sydney and Parramatta, featuring immense Greco-Roman-style stone buildings and infrastructure, had just materialized.
The only way this rapid construction makes sense, given the lack of resources and skill among supposed convicts, is if the cities were already standing.
Precisely. The material argues that the convicts arriving were actually highly skilled master stonemasons, engineers, and sculptors.
In essence, the remaining Tartarians or Moors who were captured and transported.
So they were simply tasked with restoring or occupying cities that were already there, pre-built in that magnificent classical style.
Yes, and furthermore, the prisons they built were allegedly intended to house the original indigenous peoples and the Moors, keeping them out of the way of the new settlers and maintaining the illusion of empty, newly built land.
This grand architectural lie culminates in the World Fairs, the ultimate systematic tools of mass brainwashing.
These fairs, which began soon after the collapse and exploded globally in the late 1800s, were supposedly showcases of rapid modern invention and human ingenuity. But they presented a fundamental contradiction.
Which was?
Incredible palatial architecture like a massive building in Barcelona, allegedly constructed in just 55 days, was presented as new, contemporary human achievement. But then, these structures were deliberately demolished or destroyed by accidental fires shortly after the fair closed.
Like the infamous dynamiting and burning of Chicago's magnificent White City in 1893.
Exactly. Why build something so magnificent and then immediately destroy it? That's the core paradox.
And what's the answer according to the source?
It was the nature of the illusion. The fairs were housed in pre-existing Tartarian or Moor palaces that had survived the wars and mud floods.
And they were often intentionally whitewashed, hence the nickname White City for Chicago's fair.
Yes, to hide the age, the original architecture, and the distinctive clues of the old world. This convinced the public that the early settlers and architects were suddenly capable of such rapid, magnificent construction, thereby justifying the existence of the nearly identical buildings that survived in the cities around them.
It was a massive psychological operation to cement the fabricated narrative of industrial capability.
But the fairs were also used to unveil the new, modern technology, which we now understand was allegedly reverse-engineered Antiquitech.
Absolutely. They were used to showcase Tartarian technology that the parasites had managed to control. We saw moving sidewalks, electric trains.
And the famous, iconic demonstration of Nikola Tesla's lighting of the Chicago World Fair in 1893. He illuminated the centerpiece, the 395-foot electrical tower, with 500,000 light bulbs.
All powered by his AC system, the system derived from Tartarian principles.
A massive public spectacle designed to awe the populace. But tellingly, that electrical tower, representing the potential of free energy, was immediately destroyed afterward, ensuring the technology went no further than the exhibition hall.
So the World Fair served as the essential psychological, architectural, and technological cover-up, cementing the fabricated narrative in the public mind.
The constant pattern of massive construction followed by rapid destruction by fire or dynamite, the convenient loss of blueprints, the historical dating manipulation, it all points back to a comprehensive, systematic erasure that scanned the globe.
The sheer scale of coordination claimed in these 4 chapters, across technology theft, geophysical warfare, the true motives of global conflicts, and architectural fabrication happening globally over decades, it necessitates that we look at established history through a lens of deep, aggressive, critical examination.
It does. And the core question Chapter 8 leaves us with is this. How much of the world we inhabit today is truly new, and how much is simply a repurposed, whitewashed, and structurally modified remnant of a lost, giant, technologically advanced civilization that was systematically destroyed.
That's a powerful and disturbing question to leave hanging over the history books. We've covered the systematic suppression of free energy, the physical reset involving alleged catastrophes and advanced weaponry, the true economic and historical motives behind global wars, and finally, the architectural cover-up of falsified dates and illusory world fairs.
And yet, this is only the analysis of 4 chapters. The depth of the source material we have yet to cover, including the subsequent discussion of alleged repopulation efforts, the purpose of asylums and prisons in the New Order, and the fabrication of the Industrial Revolution. It still offers so much insight into the full mechanism of the reset.
That concludes this section of our deep dive into the true history of the fallen empire of Tartaria. Join us next time as we continue our analysis of the remaining source material from this book.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are continuing our analysis of this really sweeping historical revision that's presented in the source material we're looking at. And it's all centered on this core idea that the world went through a dramatic an orchestrated shift, a global reset, right around 1776.
That's right. And when you really dig into the source material, the theory it lays out is that this parasitic elite, and it specifically identifies them as the Jesuits and the Illuminati, they basically used all the chaos of the late 18th and early 19th centuries as a cover.
An opportunity.
A huge opportunity. Their objective, according to this, was singular. Wipe the entire Tartarian Empire off the map. This vast, technologically superior civilization, just gone. And with it, destroy their free energy infrastructure and then completely falsify global history to install a new world order, one that's, defined by scarcity and control.
In our last deep dive, we really navigated the overt methods of destruction. We talked about the Great Wars, the Mud-Floods, those massive coordinated fires that allegedly just cleared the world stage for this new group.
Right, the brute force part of it.
Exactly. Today, we're moving into what happened right after, the immediate aftermath. So we're focusing on the infrastructure of control, the brutal, really institutional methods that this new regime, which the source just calls the parasites, used to solidify their power.
And it's all about making sure that the memory of the old world wasn't just suppressed. It had to be systematically, completely eradicated.
So this analysis covers chapters 9 through 12.
Right, and they function as these 4 critical pillars of the New World Order's control system. It's really methodical when you lay it out. We start with Chapter 9, which gets into the falsification of the visual record. We're talking early photography.
Victorian photoshopping.
Exactly. Then we dive into the establishment of these mass confinement institutions. So Chapter 10 is on asylums, silencing anyone who didn't conform. Chapter 11 covers prisons, and this very strange idea of harvesting human energy.
And then the last piece of the puzzle.
The last piece, Chapter 12, details the strategy for seizing the next generation, the whole story of the orphans and the orphan trains. And what's crucial to understand is that these aren't just, isolated historical developments. The source presents them as a coordinated 4-part system. It's for containment, for silent eradication of memory, for mandatory re-education, and for global repopulation.
Okay, so let's start there with Chapter 9. Vanilla Skies. I love that title. The author calls it the world's first Victorian photoshopping.
It's a great term for it.
The theory is that this new regime, they had to falsify reality almost immediately, as soon as the technology became available. The earliest camera, the heliograph, is reverse engineered around 1816. Now, if you've just won a devastating global war, why is manipulating photographs your absolute top priority?
Because you have too much evidence to hide. I mean, think about it. The sheer scale of the destruction they supposedly inflicted, the mass genocide, the dismantling of a whole advanced civilization, it would leave scars on the landscape. Visible scars.
Right. Ruins everywhere.
Ruins everywhere. Depopulated cities. The parasites couldn't risk truly accurate photographs getting out there. They couldn't have pictures circulating that showed the real devastation or the remnants of these colossal Tartarian buildings just looming in the background. They had to manufacture a new reality
Fast.
immediately.
Yeah.
Create an aesthetically compliant reality that suggested, continuous modern development, bustling populations. And they had to imprint that on the public mind before the trauma of the reset had even fully subsided.
So the source material is arguing this isn't just, bad cameras or poor quality early photos. This was a deliberate high-tech operation for its time. Okay, so let's unpack that. What were the technical details? How did they allegedly pull off this wholesale erasure of reality?
Well, it was incredibly sophisticated for the era. We're talking about them using the limits and the capabilities of these early photographic processes to their advantage, specifically Victorian photo montages.
Which is more than just cutting and pasting, I take it.
Oh, way more. The source explains that these darkroom techniques allowed them to combine up to 30 different glass plates, so 30 layers to form a single image.
30? That's incredible.
It's a huge amount of complexity. And the argument is that this wasn't for artistic reasons. This provided the technical infrastructure for mass manipulation. If you have 30 layers to work with, you can completely reconstruct a background, you can change the horizon, you can replace the entire sky without leaving obvious seams, at least not to the untrained eye.
So what were they targeting with this? What specifically were they trying to scrub from the historical record with all these layers?
They had three primary targets. First, the most obvious one. The surviving grand Tartarian or Moorish buildings, these huge structures that they couldn't just knock down easily. If one was still standing in the distance of a photo, it had to go.
Just paint it out.
Just paint it out. The second target was the remnants of the old world's energetic infrastructure. Now, this is where it gets strange. The source claims that these large ancient trees you see on horizons in old photos were actually massive conductors, energy centers.
So they got rid of the trees, too.
Painted over or replaced entirely. And this whole process, both for the buildings and the trees, was apparently known in the industry as sky swapping.
So if you've got a dome or some colossal piece of pre-reset architecture still visible on the edge of let's say, a rapidly rebuilt city like Chicago or San Francisco.
You just replace the entire sky. You swap in a bland vanilla sky that doesn't show the scale of the damage or any of the old inconvenient buildings.
It's a blank slate.
Exactly. The bland uniform sky becomes the visual signature of the replacement world. But it went even deeper than just architecture. I mean, the period right after these destructive events of the early 1800s was defined by catastrophic depopulation.
Right, mass genocide.
But if you look at photos of, say, New York or London from that time, they often look bustling. They look crowded. It seems to contradict the whole theory.
So what's the explanation for that?
The source argues that the people, the animals, the horses, the carriages, they were often literally painted into the photos. They used the same layering techniques to mask the true, empty, depopulated state of the cities.
So you're faking a population boom.
You're projecting an image of stable governance, a thriving society. You're hiding the true scale of death and devastation that just took place.
That level of coordination, that consistency, it suggests this couldn't just be a few artists in different cities making their own choices. The source is arguing this implies a massive, globally coordinated effort, right? A universal standard for what official reality is supposed to look like.
It has to be. It requires centralization, standardization, and long-term planning. I mean, the source points to this one example, Dexter Press, Inc. It was a major publisher of what they called Chrome-era postcards, and this went on well into the mid-20th century. By the 1940s, this one company was frequently using the exact same sky, the same cloud formations, the same lighting, the same tonal palette in photographs published of cities all across North America, South America, and Europe.
Same sky file, basically.
It's a template. That kind of uniformity, sustained over decades and across continents, it strongly implies there was a central directive, a single authority managing the visual identity of the new world landscape. It's like a signature.
That logistical effort is just alarming to think about. Okay, let's talk about something else the author points to as a kind of signal. This idea of deliberate absurdity being placed into the timeline. The bizarre case of William Mumler and his spirit photography.
Right. Mumler is the perfect example of how the narrative architects allegedly sowed confusion into the historical record. He became famous for spirit photography. He claimed he could capture images of your deceased loved ones in a photo with you.
Which would have been a potent service, I imagine, for a public that had just been through mass death and trauma.
Hugely potent. A direct service aimed at a massive, grieving public. Now, the source claims he was mass-producing these fake photos featuring deceased people by the 1940s.
Okay, but hang on. The standard historical timeline doesn't say Mumler was born in 1832.
It does?
So how could a man born in 1832 be mass-producing complex, layered fake photos in the 1940s? I mean, he would have been over 100 years old,
What?
decades after his own purported working life. That timeline is it's absurd on its face.
And that is precisely the point the source makes. That conflict, that jarring absurdity in the official story is presented as one of the deliberate red flags. It's a signal to any researcher paying attention that the foundational biographical details are suspect.
That they're designed to throw you off.
Exactly, to throw off accurate dating, to obscure the true age of the technology. Maybe Mumler's tech existed far earlier, or maybe the dates linked to his work were just pushed forward to fit this new, fake post-1776 chronology. The whole timeline, just like the photos themselves, is under scrutiny.
So while they're busy manufacturing the visual reality on the ground, they also need eyes in the sky. They need to plan the next phase of this erasure. And that's where the emergence of aerial photography fits in.
It fits perfectly. It wasn't an accidental technological advancement. It was an operational one. You see J.W. Black taking America's first aerial shots from a hot air balloon in 1860. Nadar does the same thing in France in 1858.
And a hot air balloon is the perfect vantage point.
It's the most cost-effective and immediate way for the elite to do reconnaissance. They could go up there and assess exactly which remaining Tartarian structures needed to be edited out of the photos, which ones could be repurposed, and which ones needed to be demolished right away. It was the visual blueprint for the entire sanitization project.
And the political power of a faked image was weaponized almost instantly, not just for long-term historical revision, but for immediate state control.
The prime example, the early European ones cited in the source, is Ernest Eugène Appert's Crime de la Commune from 1871. These were completely fabricated images. They were designed to discredit the anti-royalist communards in Paris.
What did they show?
They showed the communards, who were basically demanding social reforms, as these brutal, savage killers. Mass murder, slaughter, horrific scenes. The images were completely fake, but they were potent enough to turn public opinion violently against the movement.
And that practice didn't stop in 1871.
No, it set the blueprint for the future of state control. It became a key strategy for regimes like the Soviet Union. I mean, you have the infamous Stalinist Photoshop image, The Commissar Vanishes, where political opponents were literally scrubbed from official photos, wiped from history as if they never existed.
This all brings up a really critical question then. If the official historical images we rely on are this unreliable, if the photos that supposedly document the mid-19th century, the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, were actively and globally manipulated to this degree, how does that change our entire understanding of the true scale and reality of that era?
It fundamentally destabilizes the entire historical foundation of the 19th century. If the images used to justify the post-1776 narrative, the picture showing bustling, civilized cities supposedly built overnight by simple industrious settlers, if those are actually filled with painted-in crowds, fake skies, and erased monuments,
then the whole story falls apart.
the whole official history of rapid industrialization and architectural creation just doesn't hold up. The source suggests that the scale of the devastation was far greater than what we're told, and the subsequent building boom was actually a massive coordinated rebranding and occupation. They were just using stolen pre-existing Tartarian assets. So the first step of this New World Order was literally replacing the world that you saw.
It makes you wonder how much labor went into simply faking photos versus actually building the infrastructure they claimed credit for.
The labor and coordination for the photographic falsification alone, it suggests an organizational capacity that's just far beyond a bunch of independent studios. It really points to a singular ruling entity with the power to enforce a consistent visual narrative across continents and decades. And that sets the stage for the physical containment system they built next.
Let's pivot there then, from visual control to physical containment. Chapter 10. Asylums. The source material points out something really strange. Before the 1800s, caring for the mentally unwell was largely, a family thing or a local community thing.
Right.
But then suddenly, in the wake of this supposed reset, we see this massive, overwhelming need for huge, purpose-built confinement facilities. They're springing up everywhere, seemingly overnight. What drove that? What was the sudden need for this industrialized incarceration of the mentally ill in the 1800s?
Well, the official reason you'll read is always societal reform, medical enlightenment, things like that. But the source suggests the reason was much simpler. It was population control.
So these places were necessary to house who? Exactly.
The large number of surviving Old World citizens who either refused or were physically unable to comply with the enforced changes of the New World Order. The anomaly, though, the thing that gives the game away, it starts with the buildings themselves. They immediately betray the official narrative of humble beginnings.
The architectural deception. This is maybe the most shocking part of this chapter. These were not basic utilitarian structures designed for efficiency, were they?
Not even close. The descriptions in the source are just astonishing. These asylums were incredible buildings. They were constructed with highly sophisticated, often cyclopean masonry, amazing workmanship. They often resembled Roman villas or temples.
And the timeline.
The timeline is the real problem. This complex construction appeared almost overnight. Some of these massive institutions were allegedly built and operational in a year or so, and this creates a huge paradox.
Yeah, how could new settlers who are supposedly using basic hand tools to build simple wooden shacks for their own families?
Right, simple, functional houses. How could they simultaneously have the resources, the expertise, and the time to erect these elaborate, grand stone facilities all over the globe at that scale and at that speed?
It doesn't make any sense. The source material suggests it's an impossibility, and that there's only one logical explanation.
That these magnificent structures were not built by the new regime at all. They were highly advanced Tartarian buildings, old-world temples, maybe universities or governmental centers, and they were just repurposed by the parasites and given a new, sinister function.
And they tried to cover this up.
They did. To conceal this, the dates found on these kinds of buildings, grand cathedrals, orphanages, and yes, asylums often had an I or a J in front of the date.
Representing Jesus or Jupiter.
Right, and the parasites allegedly just changed that I or J to 1, which falsely implied the year was 1,000 years later. It supported their fake timeline of a rapid 19th century construction boom.
Let's look at the actual victims then, the people inside. The reasons for commitment are incredibly telling. I mean, they often have nothing to do with genuine mental illness as we'd understand it, but everything to do with social and political control. What kind of bizarre reasons could get an old-world citizen locked up indefinitely?
The list is basically a checklist for nonconformity and asset seizure. You could be committed for ambition, for reading novels.
Reading novels. So independent thought.
Independent thought, yeah. Also, political protests, laziness, religious excitement, or, and this is a crucial one, simply for being a widow. The source really emphasizes that last point. A widow was a standalone threat.
Why? Why was confining a widow such a critical mechanism for the state?
Because it was a clean legal mechanism for two things: asset seizure, and more importantly, child harvesting. In a lot of places back then, if a mother was committed, especially a single mother, her children immediately became wards of the state.
So you remove the last adult who might carry the memory of the old world.
And you guarantee that her children get funneled directly into the state's re-education and repopulation system. The asylum, in that sense, it functioned as a legal trap, a way to eliminate memory and secure the next generation all in one move.
And the numbers seem to confirm that this wasn't just a few isolated cases. This was an industrialized, targeted campaign. The growth rate is staggering.
The data speaks for itself. In Britain, the number of so-called lunatics in these centralized institutions just exploded. It went from only a few thousand at the start of the 1800s to over 100,000 by the end of the century.
Wow.
Germany founded over 400 asylums. And the source also notes a really specific spike in institutionalization during the California gold rush of 1849.
Why then?
It suggests the gold rush was less about finding gold and more about a targeted military and social operation. The goal was to eliminate what the author identifies as a Tartarian stronghold in that region, a place once known as the Isle of Cali, and replace the existing population with compliant newcomers.
This is where the theory gets really deep. It connects this confinement directly to the loss of Tartarian technology. The infamous heirloom case.
Yes, the case of James Tilly Matthews. He was confined in London's Bedlam Asylum in 1797, and this case is the linchpin of this whole energetic control theory. Matthews claimed that his mind was being controlled by a massive machine. It was 7 meters tall, he said, and he called it the heirloom.
What did this heirloom do?
He described it as operating like a giant church organ. It used magnetically charged, obnoxious gases and electromagnetic pulses to brainwash politicians and destabilize Europe. Officially, of course, this was diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenia.
But the chilling anomaly, the thing the source highlights, is the convergence of testimony.
Precisely. Dozens of unrelated inmates confined in separate institutions, all diagnosed with the same illness, described and even drew the exact same device. A complex machine operating on electromagnetic principles. The source argues this is impossible if they were all just suffering from individual delusions.
It suggests they were sensing a real environmental or energetic attack, something that the average person who wasn't so attuned couldn't perceive.
Exactly. And this connects right back to the very foundation of the old world's technology. Even the word lunatic, it comes from Luna, the moon. It's a key clue. It suggests a strong tie to electromagnetic cycles and sensitivity.
So the source is arguing that the Tartarian people were more sensitive to this kind of energy.
Yes. Highly attuned to natural electromagnetic energy. And this energy was harnessed globally through their free energy tech, and it was balanced by sonic healing centers. These were often disguised as churches, where the grand organ pipes were tuned to 432 hertz.
A natural harmonic frequency.
Associated with healing and life force, yeah.
Ah.
So when the parasites destroyed this technology, they then systematically detuned the churches to 440 hertz, which is the standard modern tuning. And it's associated with dissonance and despair. This violently destabilized the old world population.
So the difference between 432 and 440 hertz wasn't just aesthetic. The source is claiming it was physically destructive to people who are electromagnetically sensitive. Can you elaborate on the claimed impact of that shift?
The claim is that 432 hertz resonates harmoniously with the human body, with our cellular structure, and with the planet's natural Schumann resonance. It promotes well-being. The shift to 440 hertz, however, is alleged to create this internal friction and disharmony. It specifically targeted the highly attuned survivors of the Tartarian collapse.
So they just couldn't handle it.
They couldn't endure the shift to this lower, more discordant vibration that was being enforced by the New World Order's new energetic grid. They were suffering from sensory overload or psychic distress, from a frequency change that the new compliant population was either immune to or had already adapted to. The symptoms of this distress were labeled insanity, and the solution
Was these massive, grand repurposed buildings to lock them away in?
Exactly.
That is a truly chilling thought. That people were locked away not because they were internally ill, but because they were the sensitive few who couldn't endure the shift in the planet's fundamental energetic or political frequency, enforced by this new regime.
And the containment served a dual purpose. It silenced any memory of the old world, and it removed anyone who was incompatible with the New World Order's enforced low-vibration system. It was the first systematic industrialization of human containment.
Okay, so let's shift focus to Chapter 11 now, to prisons. The source points out they share the exact same architectural and timeline anomalies as the asylums. They just pop up immediately after the reset.
Same pattern.
This infrastructure, again, it just seems too massive and too sophisticated to just be for housing petty criminals in a newly formed society. So was this just about punishment, or did it have a more sinister technological function, maybe related to those energy concepts we were just discussing?
The source presents a deeply unsettling but logically consistent theory that connects the asylum technology directly to the prisons. It's called the human battery theory.
The human battery theory.
Yeah. If, as the Tartarian belief supposedly posited, all humans are powerful energetic entities, then prisons could be designed not just to contain people, but to harness that energy. The terminology used in the source is critical here. Inmates are charged and placed inside cells.
Like a battery.
It turns the entire massive facility into a grid, a type of massive battery array.
That is a powerful and unsettling metaphor. But the source argues that the architecture itself supports a literal interpretation of this. How does the physical structure of these 19th century prisons align with energy harvesting?
It connects directly to the building materials. A frequent architectural characteristic of these places, both asylums and prisons, is the mass use of red brick. The source claims that the specific pigment used to create that red color contains a high concentration of iron oxide, rust.
And rust can conduct electricity.
Right. This, the theory posits, gives the material the ability to store and conduct electricity. The extensive use of these red and white brick facades you often see is presented as resembling the structure of a modern battery configuration. You have a sophisticated conductor wrapped around a contained charge.
So if these were repurposed Tartarian buildings,
They were leveraging advanced esoteric architecture and cymatics to harness the telluric energy flowing through the earth, which was then amplified by the contained population.
and the timing fits again. We see the Criminal Law Act, introduced in Britain in 1776, right after the reset. America's first prisons open in 1785. This was clearly a critical early piece of the new societal structure.
It was foundational to the parasite stability, and this infrastructure leads directly into what the source calls the convict deception, particularly when you look at the mass deportation campaigns to Australia. Between 1778 and 1868, the historical records show over 160,000 convicts were deported to Australia.
Okay, let's unpack this deception, because that seems hugely inefficient. It's incredibly costly for a new regime that's trying to establish austerity and control.
Right.
The source argues this was not a cost-effective way to deal with real criminals, especially when, at the same time, you have people paying high fees to voluntarily emigrate to Australia.
That's the critical logical challenge. Why bear the enormous logistical expense and the decade-spanning coordination to deport 160,000 people halfway around the world if your goal is just social elimination? If they were just petty thieves or simple criminals, it would have been vastly cheaper and quicker to just execute them or lock them up locally.
Exactly. If the goal of the parasites was total eradication of the Tartarian lineage, why deport 160,000 people at great cost instead of just eliminating them? What does the source say about the cost efficiency of this fleet and the true motivation?
The source argues that the cost wasn't measured in money. It was measured in social erasure and infrastructure development. These so-called convicts, they weren't criminals, they were Old World inhabitants.
Tartarian refugees.
Possibly Tartarian refugees, skilled artisans, non-compliant Moors, and they were removed from Europe to eradicate their memory on the continent. By shipping them to Australia, the parasites did two things. One, they eliminated local descent and memory. And two, they acquired a massive forced labor pool.
A workforce.
A huge workforce. And the irony is that many of these convicts were suddenly credited in the historical records as being master stonemasons and sculptors, skills that perfectly match the elaborate pre-existing buildings they were supposedly constructing in the Australian colonies.
So they weren't building the structures.
They were the workforce tasked with maintaining and operating the captured Tartarian infrastructure.
And the use of prison ships, like the HMS Jersey off New York in 1776, that seems to suggest these were temporary, highly concentrated holding pens for people fleeing the devastation of the reset wars.
They were processing centers for captured populations. These individuals, potentially Tartarian refugees fleeing the continent's devastation, they were often confined on these ships just off the coast. It's like an aquatic version of the prison system. They might never see dry land again, effectively disappearing them from the local census and the historical record while maintaining a ready supply of forced labor.
And what's fascinating here is the alleged repurposing of these highly advanced Tartarian structures, specifically as prisons, particularly the star forts that are found all over the globe.
The star forts are maybe the ultimate symbol of the perversion of Tartarian technology. We know that these star forts, these massive geometric defensive structures, they're complex. They were designed using principles of sacred geometry and cymatics.
And what was their original purpose, according to the source?
Their original purpose was often to align with and harness telluric energy, and ideally to create a specific beneficial frequency like 528 hertz. That's the frequency associated with euphoria and healing.
And they turned them into prisons.
They turned them into prisons. Spike Island in Southern Ireland, which opened as a prison in 1847, is identified in the source as one such repurposed star fort.
So instead of being centers of healing and energy generation for the benefit of the population, they were transformed into systems of energy containment and psychological suppression for the captured population.
Yes, it's the ultimate betrayal. The ultimate perversion of this technology was taking these sacred cymatic resonators and using them to house prisoners. The source suggests the parasites were literally harvesting energy, low vibrational, despairing energy from the people contained inside. It wasn't about traditional punishment designed to reform. It was about conversion, suppression, and technological harvesting of human energy, reducing the inmates to a low vibrational, subdued state that was compatible with the New World Order. The Star Fort, a symbol of freedom and healing, was converted into a cage and a battery.
Okay, so we move now to Chapter 12.
Yeah.
This is the final and maybe the most insidious phase of establishing control, dealing with the next generation through orphans and the orphan trains. This is that staggering boom in orphanages and the movement to relocate children that began in the mid-1800s. The source material frames this not as charity, but as the deliberate industrial seizure of the next generation to repopulate the devastated Old World territories with compliant subjects.
This was the crucial long-term strategy for the New World Order. You had to ensure the youth had absolutely zero memory of the world that was. The official narrative, of course, was that these were just unwanted children, abandoned by destitute parents. But that narrative itself, according to the source, was built on a linguistic deception.
Let's challenge that narrative then, the idea of abandoned babies, the foundlings. How does the source connect this to linguistic manipulation?
The source links the term foundling, used to describe a baby found abandoned, to the architectural term founded, which was used to mask the takeover of existing Tartarian buildings. The linguistic similarity, the author argues, is a deliberate manipulation by the church and state the parasites to mask the organized institutional removal of infants.
So it allowed them to frame the mass seizure of children as benevolent charity.
Instead of what it really was, systematic forced adoption or slavery.
What was the specific strategic goal behind the timing and the age requirements of this mass seizure?
The goal was swift, mass repopulation and total indoctrination. The regime focused heavily on removing children aged 7 months and younger, the precognitive stage. This was to ensure they had no conscious memory of their biological parents or any elements of the old world.
A completely blank slate.
A completely blank slate. These infants and toddlers were then dispatched via the orphan trains to replace the killed-off Old World adults in the new colonies and the developing regions. And once they were seized, they underwent rigorous re-education.
New names, new history.
New, often standardized names. A newly fabricated history. Basic functional education. It was all designed to westernize and indoctrinate them, eradicating their heritage, their native tongue, and any potential lineage ties completely.
And the source is explicit about what happened to those who resisted this indoctrination.
If the forced westernization failed, the source states they would face lifetime incarceration in the prison and asylum system we just talked about, or they would simply be eliminated. This is a process designed for complete cultural assimilation or disposal.
The figurehead of the American movement was a man named Charles Loring Brace. He was a minister who spearheaded the Children's Aid Society starting in 1853. The source material alleges he was a vocal racist who framed this as a necessary demographic operation.
Brace was a central operator in this demographic engineering project. The source highlights his explicit aim was to establish a white nation in the American Midwest. And to do that, he actively excluded non-white children, specifically Moors and Aztecs, who the author posits were the true indigenous forefathers of America.
So that confirms the movement wasn't charity.
No, it was calculated institutional demographic engineering. It was designed to replace one population with a compliant, historically blank slate.
And the fate of these children on the orphan trains was just horrific. It was essentially state-sanctioned indentured slavery, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The whole process was cold and transactional. Children were given new IDs. They were violently separated from any remaining siblings. And then they were effectively bought, sold, and auctioned off into indentured slavery.
Destined for what kind of work?
Grueling work in mills, mines, farms, or as domestic servants and chimney sweeps. The source describes the highly degrading nature of forcing these young children to perform physical tasks or sing for potential owners. And this was often staged outside local Masonic lodges, which suggests the institutional nature of the buyers was tied directly to the governing elite.
Let's just try to quantify the American operation, because the logistical scale is just mind-boggling for that time period.
Between 1854 and 1929, this massive logistical operation transported an estimated 250,000 children from major East Coast cities like New York and Philadelphia out to the Midwest. In New York City alone, this represented a shocking 6% of the city's population during that period.
6%. That's not a side project.
No, it was a decades-long, calculated transfer of human resources. It was designed to fill the demographic vacuum left by the Old World collapse and the subsequent wars.
And this clearly wasn't just happening in America. The global scale of it seems to confirm the source's claim of a unified, coordinated effort by the elite to solve this repopulation problem internationally.
The global data points are crucial to this. The Vatican is alleged to have orchestrated the transfer of 425,000 infants to Italy between 1852 and 1860. Spain and Portugal also received large numbers of these foundlings.
Why there?
This transfer was essential for repopulating areas in southern Europe that had been decimated by war and plague. And if you go further east, Russia, the alleged former heartland of the Tartarian Empire, had an estimated 7 million street children by 1920. The foundling homes there were receiving 10,500 children a year from all across the old Tartarian territory.
And even Australia, which we mentioned with the convict deception, was a destination for this repopulation effort too.
Exactly. Australia received young children under the guise of migration. They were delivered to abusive, state-run institutions as part of a Freemason-led effort to establish a new, compliant settler population. They were effectively replacing both the indigenous population and the recently deported convict labor pool with historically blank children.
This raises a really important question. The source material suggests this was a complete, coordinated global operation to seize the youth of a destroyed civilization, use them as indentured slaves, and simultaneously eradicate their entire heritage and language. This was the silent, long-term weapon of the New World Order, ensuring that the legacy of Tartaria died with the last generation who could remember it.
It was the perfect self-sustaining system of control. You remove the adults through war and institutionalization. Then you seize and indoctrinate the only generation that could possibly remember the world that was. By erasing the children's history, the parasites guaranteed a future population that would believe the lie of the rapid industrial revolution and the benevolent founding of these new institutions.
This has been a deeply detailed and, frankly, a very unsettling exploration of the methods of control that supposedly followed the 1776 global reset. We've synthesized the source material to show how the destruction of the Tartarian Empire was solidified, not just through bombs and floods, but through the systematic manipulation of reality with photography and the industrial seizure of human capital through the grand architecture of asylums, the technological harvesting of prisons, and the calculated theft of the future generation via the orphan trains.
And if the buildings we see today, the grand libraries, government offices, monuments, these huge institutional complexes, if they were truly Tartarian, just repurposed and whitewashed, and if the systems designed to contain the survivors, the asylums, and prisons were architectural lies built on advanced suppressed energy concepts, then the implications for modern society are just immense. The narrative we are taught about the 19th century surge in innovation is presented here as not just slightly revised, but as a complete self-serving replacement narrative. It's built literally on stolen technology, stolen architecture, and the forced labor of stolen children. It suggests that the institutions we rely on today were founded on the destruction of freedom and the systematic suppression of historical truth.
That's all the time we have for this portion of the deep dive. We still have a few more critical sections of this book to cover, including the author's analysis of the rapid repopulation, the very bizarre story of the Cabbage Patch Babies, and how the entire modern concept of the Industrial Revolution was allegedly fabricated. We will be continuing this discussion next time.
Okay, let's unpack this. In this last part of the book, we transition from the massive historical erasure of the Tartarian Empire right into the chilling systematic mechanisms of control. The ones established by the group the sources call the parasitic elite. Our mission today is, well, it's laser-focused on 4 critical chapters.
A final 4.
Exactly. They describe how the New World Order secured its power. We're starting with demographic engineering, moving through technological theft, the ultimate war against free energy, and then...
And finally, the blueprint for what's happening right now, the next reset.
That's it.
That's right. We are moving past the initial catastrophe. The world-level fires, the mud floods, the history of whitewashing, to understand the immediate aftermath, the logistics of control.
The how, not just the what.
Precisely. Who exactly filled the planetary vacuum left behind? What foundational technology was leveraged? And I think critically, how did they build a system of control so robust that is still operating today?
That's the key question.
This entire final segment provides the so what for the whole narrative. It draws these direct and frankly disturbing lines from 19th century operations like the orphan trains straight to modern deep state agendas.
And even digital surveillance, it all connects.
It all connects.
So let's jump straight into chapter 13, because it makes a truly staggering claim about how the planet was restocked after the alleged global catastrophe.
Restocked is the perfect word for it.
The core claim here is that the parasites engineered a massive demographic shock in the mid-1800s. And this wasn't natural. It was calculated, unnatural methods designed to replace the supposedly wiped-out adult Tartarian population.
And replace them with a new, controllable, pliable generation.
A blank slate.
Exactly, a blank slate. And the statistical anomalies cited in the source material are, well, they're deeply challenging to conventional history. They suggest not just a natural recovery from a disaster, but an unnatural, calculated population boom.
What kind of numbers are we talking about?
Well, consider the scale they present. The population of England is cited as having supposedly surged from this tiny estimate of, 37,898 people in 1141.
Which is already a shocking number if you think about it.
It's incredibly small. And then it jumps to a truly staggering 9 million by 1835.
9 million? How is that even possible?
And that's just one country. Now, step back and look globally. The world population allegedly jumped from only 112 million in 1610 to 928 million by 1886. The sheer magnitude of this growth, The source material argues it's just statistically impossible through natural means alone.
Especially when you factor in what was happening at the time.
Right. This wasn't a time of peace and prosperity. It's coinciding with a period of massive, documented global conflict, famines, widespread infrastructural destruction. It just doesn't add up.
That's the crux of the argument, isn't it? If the pre-reset adults were gone, killed, incarcerated, or just non-compliant with the new rulers, you have a vacuum.
A vacuum of compliant labor.
So, if natural birth rates couldn't account for this rapid global surge, where did the new populace come from? The book's answer, chillingly, is the orphan machine.
The orphan machine.
Yeah.
And that theory centers heavily on the systemic removal or maybe even creation of children, specifically aged 7 months and younger.
So young, basically infants.
Infants, yes, who were then deliberately dispersed worldwide via the notorious orphan trains, which were operating roughly between 1854 and 1929.
And the scale of this, I mean, in the United States alone, it's mind-boggling.
It's staggering. An estimated 250,000 children, 250,000, were transported just from crowded centers like New York and Philadelphia out to the Midwest.
250,000.
Now, when you crunch the numbers on that, that represented roughly 6% of the entire population of those cities at the time.
6%. To put that into modern context, imagine 6% of New York City's population today, just loaded onto trains and shipped across the country.
It would be an unprecedented national crisis, but back then it was just policy.
And this wasn't just an American phenomenon, was it? The sources say this was global.
Oh, absolutely. A simultaneous, massive global effort. Britain was reportedly exporting well over 100,000 children to Canada.
And that was on top of what was happening within Canada itself.
Yes, in addition to placing 150,000 native Canadian children into controlled homes. The scope reaches into Europe, too. Italy, allegedly orchestrated heavily by the Vatican, received 425,000 infants.
From where?
From areas identified as Great Tartaria. And this was in a very short span, between 1852 and 1860. The sources are absolutely clear. This was not an act of benevolence. This wasn't poverty relief.
No, this was a logistical operation.
A logistical operation designed to immediately establish a compliant, historyless workforce and a new societal foundation.
And that's the critical insight here. If we connect this to the bigger picture, these children weren't just being relocated or adopted.
Not in the way we think of it today, no.
Yeah.
They were stripped of their history, their names, their heritage. They were given identification numbers.
So they were treated like inventory.
Effectively, yes. Bought, sold, auctioned into virtual slavery in the newly required infrastructure. The mines, the textile mills, the farms. They were strategically replacing the Tartarian and Moorish adults who had been killed off or imprisoned.
Because those adults wouldn't comply.
They refused to comply with the tenets of the New World Order. They remembered the old way. These children wouldn't.
And this whole effort was systematized by some very influential figures. The sources really highlight one man in particular.
Charles Loring Brace.
Right. They describe him as a church minister, a philanthropist, but also a known racist, and he ran the powerful Children's Aid Society.
And the motivation cited by the book is explicitly focused on ethnic cleansing and control. Brace's stated aim was to establish America as a white nation,
while actively dismissing and erasing the complex Moorish, Tartarian, and Aztec heritage that allegedly characterized the pre-reset civilization.
He reportedly even refused to assist non-white children in these relocation efforts, which just cements the racial component of this demographic engineering. It was a targeted replacement.
This kind of systematic engineering, it required more than just trains and paperwork. You'd have to change how people think.
A profound cultural and psychological shift was needed. You had to normalize the idea that children were, well, commodities, or almost spontaneously generated, completely disconnected from traditional family structures.
So how do you do that?
And this is where the cultural evidence, hiding in plain sight in early 20th century media, gets truly bizarre and instructive.
The mechanisms they use to hide this in plain sight are just striking. How do you normalize mass baby production or replacement?
Through media, of course.
We see the emergence of early cinema, specifically Alice Guy's 1896 film, La Fée aux Choux Literally, The Fairy of the Cabbages.
And there was a sequel in 1900.
Right. These short, famous, silent films, they literally show a fairy violently, sometimes comically, plucking babies from cabbages in a garden.
And the babies are clearly seen crying. She's just pulling them out of the ground and placing them on a blanket. It's deeply unsettling imagery, but it was designed for mass consumption.
It frames birth as something magical, something separate from a mother.
Exactly. And this imagery permeated the culture far beyond cinema. You also had the phenomenon of incubator sideshows.
This part is just wild.
It was popularized by a man named Martin A. County, who marketed himself as the baby doctor.
But the sources are quick to point out he was not actually a qualified physician.
Not at all. And at major international events like the World Fairs, starting in Berlin in 1896, people would pay 25 cents a quarter to literally view premature babies housed in incubators. He branded it the Infantorium.
A sideshow attraction, a freak show, basically.
Right next to the Ferris wheel.
Yeah.
And the details around County's operation are astonishing. The sources claim the babies were reportedly given a shot of brandy before entering the incubator.
A shot of brandy to an infant.
And they were literally on loan. It was treated as a fun fair spectacle, which raises the obvious and unanswered question: where did County source the vast quantities of these premature babies?
And where were their actual parents during all this?
The source argues that these public displays were crucial. They were desensitizing the public to the idea of children being medically managed, separated from their biological families, and viewed as, well, objects of scientific curiosity.
Or public display, entertainment.
The normalization campaign continues with the repopulation postcards.
I've seen some of these. They're surreal.
They are. Originating primarily from Germany and spreading rapidly across Europe, these postcards depict babies being delivered not through traditional means, but by storks being fished from rivers.
Or emerging from these bizarre, steam-powered machines that supposedly use cabbage and rose seeds.
We're talking about explicit propaganda here. Some of these cards, according to the sources, explicitly stated babies for sale.
And my favorite, no returns.
No returns. Chilling. It seems like a coordinated multinational media campaign designed to replace the natural concept of birth with something whimsical, mass-produced, and commercially available.
This level of population control and management then brings us to maybe the most outlandish theory in this chapter.
The doppelganger.
The link to the German origin of the doppelganger, the double walker. The theory suggests a direct connection to mass human cloning experiments.
Right. Following the last reset, it implies that the new population wasn't just found in orphanages or relocated from one place to another,
but that a significant portion of it may have been artificially manufactured or duplicated.
Duplicated in large batches to fill the labor void with biologically compliant workers. That notion that the population was not just replaced but possibly replicated, it ties into the overarching theme.
The new rulers sought reliable, predictable, and controllable workers.
A fresh slate, engineered to be free of the memory, the knowledge, and what the book calls the high vibrational ethos of the old world.
So once this new population was manufactured and relocated, the next challenge was controlling the resources they would use.
And the technology they would be allowed to access.
Yeah.
Which leads us directly to Chapter 14 and the manufactured lie of the Industrial Revolution.
Okay, Chapter 14. This challenges the official historical timeline of innovation head-on. Let's dig into the mechanical impossibilities of that timeline. We are told humanity made, virtually zero meaningful technological progress for hundreds of thousands of years.
Right. We were just sitting around.
And then suddenly, between 1760 and 1840, a mere 80-year burst, we invent everything that defines the modern world.
The train, large-scale factory mechanisms, the telegraph, complex electrical principles, it all just appears.
And the book emphasizes that all of this happened concurrently during a period marked by mass war, global catastrophe, fires, floods.
And the intense repopulation efforts we just talked about. The sheer chronological impossibility is what the sources highlight. The Industrial Revolution supposedly overlapped entirely with the Napoleonic Wars, the American Civil Wars.
And the aftermath of these devastating global floods and earthquakes that purportedly destroyed the Tartarian infrastructure.
It raises a huge logical question. How were massive new mines, complex inventions requiring intricate supply chains, and the immense infrastructure required for industrialization conceived, financed, and built concurrently?
During a period of such widespread chaos, resource scarcity, and demographic upheaval, it doesn't seem possible.
The theory posits they weren't built from scratch. They were reverse engineered and repurposed.
And they relied critically on the forced, cheap labor of the newly acquired youth.
From the orphan machine. The Victorian workhouses, infamous for their brutal conditions and high mortality rates, are seen not merely as poverty relief institutions,
but as reset labor camps.
Exactly. Their purpose was re-education, stripping the remaining children of old-world knowledge, and directly feeding the continuous stream of disposable labor needed for the new factories, mines, and mills.
So when we look closely at the inventions of this era, The source material argues they were clear examples of stolen Tartarian antiquitech.
Antiquitech, yes. Take the very structure of the telegraph system,
Okay.
the necessary copper wires and the poles used to string them. They often appear in old photographs that predate the official 1837 invention date by decades, sometimes even in images from the early 1800s.
So the infrastructure was already there.
The implication is that they were merely repurposing the massive, previously existing free energy grid infrastructure left over from the old world.
What about other inventions?
The invention of the voltaic pile by Alessandro Volta in 1800 is another striking anomaly cited. Now, Volta built on Luigi Galvani's 1780s discovery of electrical current in severed frog legs.
Right, I remember that from school.
But the real mystery isn't the discovery of electricity itself. It's how Volta knew the exact mechanism and material to construct his true battery.
What do you mean?
Specifically, why did he know to use brine salt water in his pile? And how did he know that living things operate on fundamental electrical circuitry? The source argues this implies he wasn't discovering electricity.
He was working from a blueprint.
He was working from pre-existing advanced Tartarian knowledge regarding bioelectrical systems and energy storage that had been suppressed.
But the spectrometer, that one's even crazier.
The spectrometer, invented in 1802, presents an even greater paradox that deeply underscores the reverse engineering argument. This device is used to measure and analyze electromagnetic radiation and light spectrums.
Which requires a pretty advanced understanding of physics.
Immensely advanced. And this is where it gets truly striking. How could scientists in 1802 possess such detailed functional knowledge of radiation, the electromagnetic spectrum, and particle physics?
When the official discovery of radioactivity by Henri Becquerel didn't happen until 1896.
94 years later. To successfully build a device to measure something not yet officially known to exist.
It strongly suggests the device was copied.
Or reverse engineered from Tartarian schematics that already incorporated a deep understanding of the ether and energy fields.
The sources also dig into metallurgy as a crucial component of this theft.
The 19th century saw a massive, immediate push for research into copper, mercury, and, interestingly, red bricks.
Red bricks.
All of which are identified in the source material as key components used in Tartarian energy storage, harnessing, and construction, particularly in relation to the etheric grid.
And the consequences of this sudden, immense resource hunger, they connect directly to modern ethical concerns.
Yes, the source draws a stark and uncomfortable parallel here that we really need to spend time on.
Go on.
The 19th century resource push for copper and mercury, driven by the need to exploit stolen technology, mirrors almost exactly the child slave labor we see in modern lithium and cobalt mining.
We are talking about 40,000 children documented in the Democratic Republic of Congo alone in 2014, working in horrific conditions.
And the point is this. This endless resource extractive model, fueled by human misery, is funding the 21st century's allegedly clean electric vehicle and solar panel industries.
So it's the same system, just different materials.
The parasitic system requires endless resource extraction, regardless of the human cost, to power the controlled technology they allow us to use. It links the ethics of the 1800s directly to today's supply chains.
It's a repeating pattern of exploitation disguised as progress.
It is.
And Chapter 14 concludes by framing the success of the internal combustion engine, the ICE, not as a superior invention,
but as a deliberate political and financial choice. The ICE's triumph, according to the book, was entirely driven by the financial greed of powerful figures like Henry Ford and John D. Rockefeller.
Standard Oil.
Standard Oil. This was an active, aggressive effort to kill the pre-existing, successful electric vehicle market of the late 1800s.
And people forget how effective those early electric cars were.
Absolutely. New York taxi companies were running electrobats as early as 1894. They were capable of 100 miles on a single charge.
100 miles? That's impressive, even by some modern standards.
But that technology represented clean, decentralized energy that was not reliant on controlled fossil fuels. To ensure the profitability of the new global oil matrix, the electric vehicle market had to be systematically eliminated.
And fossil fuels, controlled entirely by a small elite, had to be established as the foundational global energy source.
And that sets the stage perfectly for Chapter 15, which focuses on the tragic figure who stood directly against that entire edifice of control and profit. Nikola Tesla.
Tesla. He is portrayed here as the ultimate architect of the potential modern world.
And the central, most powerful human figure in the war between free, clean energy and controlled, profitable energy. His entire career was defined by this conflict against centralized power.
It started early on with the famous clash with Thomas Edison.
Over direct current versus alternating current, DC versus AC, Edison allegedly promised Tesla $50,000, an astronomical sum at the time, to make his inefficient DC motors functional.
And Tesla did it.
He succeeded, redesigning them entirely. And then Edison refused to pay, claiming it was just a joke, a bit of American humor.
That dispute quickly escalated beyond just patents, right, into the infamous War of the Currents.
It did. And the tactics used by Edison during that war show the sheer brutality the emerging establishment was willing to employ to protect their profitable, controlled DC system.
Edison's smear campaign against Tesla's AC, it involved rigging the newly invented electric chair.
He personally endorsed and funded it. The goal was to ensure the prolonged, agonizing deaths of the accused, all to shock the public and discredit Tesla's technology as inherently deadly and unpredictable.
It's pure sabotage.
And yet, despite the sabotage and the smears, Tesla persisted. He ultimately succeeded in proving AC's superiority by lighting up the entire Chicago World Fair in 1893.
A massive, dazzling display of power and efficiency.
It was, and this success eventually led him to win the contract to build the world's first large-scale hydroelectric dam at Niagara Falls, cementing his name in history.
But his real ambition, the one that threatened the parasitic elite the most, it went far beyond just AC.
So much further. His life's work became obsessed with harnessing the aether for truly wireless, globally distributed power.
And the Tesla coil was the key.
His 1891 invention, the Tesla coil, was the technical core of this vision. It used the principle of resonance to amplify low voltages into truly enormous ones, capable of illuminating bulbs wirelessly across vast distances. No connection.
And this is where the source explicitly links Tesla back to the Tartarian Empire.
It does. When he relocated his lab to the remote Colorado Springs in 1899 to work in secret, the structures he designed and built, these massive antennas, complex resonators, and capacitors, are said to have precisely mirrored the intricate equipment seen on old-world buildings.
So he was trying to rebuild their tech.
He was trying to rebuild technology intended to harness energy directly from the aether. He essentially viewed the entire Earth as a giant condenser, capable of propagating energy along its natural energy lines, or ley lines.
And during his deep research there, he even detected a high-frequency radio signal, but not from Earth.
Right. He detected a signal from one of Mars's moons, suggesting far broader communication capabilities than officially acknowledged. His aim, as described in the source, was profoundly humanitarian.
He wanted to develop radio-controlled technology, things we might call automatons or drones today.
Specifically, to make war utterly pointless.
Wow.
By being able to destroy any incoming threat ships, armies, infrastructure instantly and remotely. Imagine a world where all energy was clean, free, globally accessible, and large-scale war was logistically impossible.
That was the utopian Tartarian ethos he was actively trying to restore.
Unsurprisingly, the parasites saw this concept of free, unlimited energy as an existential threat to their entire financial model of control.
Which brings us to J.P. Morgan.
J.P. Morgan. When he invested in Tesla's colossal Wardenclyffe project on Long Island in 1901, the source argues it was purely for controlling the emerging field of radio broadcasting.
He wanted to monopolize and control global information flow.
Not to provide free energy to every home. So when Guglielmo Marconi, a figure who allegedly took credit for 17 of Tesla's existing patents, succeeded in transmitting a signal across the Atlantic,
Morgan pulled the plug.
he immediately terminated all funding for Wardenclyffe. The free energy grid was dead before it even began.
That betrayal was devastating for Tesla. It forced him to shift focus.
With his humanitarian goals blocked, he increasingly focused his brilliant mind on the highly secretive death ray, or directed energy weapon, DEW. He was trying to sell it to world powers as the ultimate deterrent.
And the sources even wade into the mystery of the massive 1908 Tunguska explosion in Russia,
Which flattened 770 square miles of trees. The theory presented is that it wasn't a comet or an asteroid.
but an accidental wireless energy transmission from Wardenclyffe.
Aimed at the North Pole, that went awry.
Hey, so we are being told that Tesla, using technology built on repurposed Tartarian knowledge, accidentally flattened hundreds of square miles in Siberia.
That's the terrifying, world-altering power the parasites were fighting against.
Absolutely. It demonstrates the scale of the technology lost and the lengths the parasitic elite would go to ensure that technology remains suppressed.
Which raises an important question that defines this chapter and forms a chilling pattern.
Why do scientists who pursue truly free energy systems, the very systems that would undermine the fossil fuel and utility monopolies, consistently disappear or die violently?
The pattern is extensive and deeply suspicious. It seems to confirm the existence of this active suppression.
Let's take a moment to reflect on the tragedy of these individuals. There is the deeply strange case of Dr. Stefan Marinov.
A leading figure of the European free energy movement.
He allegedly committed suicide in 1997, but the circumstances, they defy logic. The area where he landed was described as luminescent. There was no blood.
And the police took 2 full weeks to notify his family. His apartment, which held all his research, was immediately sealed off. It's suspicious, to say the least.
Then there is the unsettling case of Dr. John Mullen, a nuclear physicist specializing in innovative free energy concepts. He died from arsenic poisoning.
And his girlfriend, Tamara, was immediately accused, only to also die mysteriously shortly after leaving this terrifying voice message for a relative.
Don't be surprised if you find my body floating in your dad's swimming pool.
It's an escalating pattern of clear targeting and cover-up.
We also have Dmitry Petronov,
The inventor of a plasma battery that was so efficient it powered his home entirely for 14 months, a device that, if commercialized, could instantly cripple the fossil fuel industry.
and just weeks after perfecting it in 2010, he vanished completely.
After attending a prearranged meeting with an official from the Russian Science Academy, he was just gone.
And perhaps the most famous and cautionary example, Stan Myers.
Stan Myers. He developed an engine that famously ran solely on tap water, proving the viability of hydrogen on demand. He died suddenly in 1997 while having lunch with 2 potential investors.
Reportedly uttering the chilling last words, "They poisoned me."
Why is the method of death so varied? From arsenic to alleged suicide to sudden heart attack. But the motivation, the suppression of free energy, always the same.
This deadly pattern strongly suggests that the war on free energy, which began with the destruction of Tartarian infrastructure and the betrayal of Tesla, continues fiercely today.
Against anyone who dares threaten the established energy matrix.
That brings us full circle and sets the terrifying stage for our final chapter, Chapter 16. It moves from historical suppression to the structure and blueprint for the current NWO agenda.
Which the sources call the next reset.
It begins with the context of modern suspicion, the questioning of figures like Elon Musk and Joe Rogan, or the seemingly impossible failed assassination attempt on figures like Donald Trump.
And it builds the core theory of the parasite's illusion of control. The core theory, as presented, is that the parasites strictly adhere to a form of universal law or karma.
So to maintain this adherence, they believe they must disclose their plans to the public.
Even if in masked form, they use fiction, mass media, Hollywood, blockbuster films to put their plans in plain sight, knowing the compliant public will simply dismiss it as entertainment.
Or paranoid conspiracy.
Exactly. The movie Leave the World Behind, which depicts a sudden technological and civilization collapse and was executive produced by the Obamas, is cited as a recent example of putting the blueprint in public view.
The modern control structure is then detailed in a clear 8-level pyramid of parasitic hierarchy. It explains exactly who holds the power.
At the very top, levels 1 and 2 are the absolute rulers. This includes the world monarch, a figure shrouded in mystery, possibly, the book states, a pure-blood Anunnaki descendant.
And the Crown Council of 13, representing the 13 bloodline families.
The Orsini family, one of the most ancient aristocratic houses, is cited as allegedly sitting at the apex of this council, wielding untold influence over global finance and control.
Moving down to levels 3 and 4, we find the agenda setters.
They manage the rollout of the overall plan. This includes the Committee of 300, whose express stated aim, according to the book, is the total destruction of American sovereignty.
And the dismantling of the existing nation-state model.
They founded influential groups like the Club of Rome in 1968. Within this grouping, the sources emphasize the decree of Lord Bertram Russell, a senior committee member who allegedly mandated that at least half the world's population must be removed.
And that the method used to achieve this is irrelevant to the objective.
We also see the powerful think tanks operating at this level, such as the Bilderberg Group, founded in 1954. They exert massive silent influence over publishing, education, and global politics.
Their highly secretive meetings, attended by future and current world leaders, are never publicly publicized. It shows the depth of their governmental influence worldwide.
Directly beneath them are the central banks and tax revenue structures. the mechanisms designed to control the flow of all global capital.
Levels 6 and 7 represent operational control. This is the implementation arm of the agenda.
Right. This includes the major corporations, Microsoft, Pfizer, DuPont, which shape public consumption, health outcomes, and digital infrastructure. It also includes religion and governments used to control the masses through established rules and codified laws.
This is the level that gave us John D. Rockefeller's 1914 creation of the General Education Board. So what does this all mean for education today? Rockefeller spent a staggering $129 million, an enormous amount in that era, not out of pure benevolence.
But to build an educational system based on the factory model, the curriculum was specifically designed to be covertly destructive to critical thinking.
It was engineered, according to the sources, to instill punctuality, obedience, and repetitive work above all else.
Training generations of compliant factory workers who would not question management or the societal structure imposed upon them.
Standardized testing, the simplification of history, the elimination of lateral critical thought, all cited as methods used to achieve this obedience. The control mechanism starts literally in the classroom.
And the current reset, codified as UN Agenda 21 and the more aggressive Agenda 30, is focused on a critical shift.
How so?
Instead of relying on mass catastrophe to wipe out populations, the new model focuses on pervasive, digital, and pharmaceutical control. It's driven by the realization that AI will soon replace many human workers, making them economically superfluous.
The World Economic Forum is cited as the primary driver of this current phase.
The WEF, funded by giants like Amazon, Apple, BlackRock, and Bill Gates, openly promotes its goals. These include the implementation of 15-minute cities, universal digital ID,
and the explicit ending of private home ownership.
Their often quoted and truly chilling line, "We won't own anything, but we will be happy," encapsulates this vision of total central control over resources, mobility, and identity.
Crucially, the chapter dedicates significant focus to the controversial topic of 5G. It's seen as a foundational component of this digital control matrix.
The sources point out that 5G masts were installed rapidly during the pandemic, supposedly for faster internet, but often utilizing fraudulent safety certificates.
Issued by companies that were dissolved or defunct, making the certifications dubious at best.
And the potential for biological harm from this unchecked rollout is described in chilling detail. Concerns focus heavily on oxidative stress, which leads directly to DNA damage, decreased fertility, and various forms of cancer.
And what makes this technology particularly concerning, according to the sources, is the vulnerability of children and animals.
Because of their significantly higher water content compared to adults. The book cites specific, disturbing examples, such as cows in certain areas going suddenly blind near new mast installations.
So the core theory here is that 5G is not merely a communication upgrade.
It is described as a high-frequency, non-visible weapon of control and potentially depopulation, designed to reduce public health while expanding the digital surveillance state.
To conclude the analysis of this current agenda, the sources offer a path toward resistance.
And it's based on frequency and vibration, an idea rooted in the alleged Old World ethos. The parasites are described as low-vibrational beings who essentially feed off public negativity, despair, and division.
Emotions that they intentionally cultivate through their actions and media control.
Precisely.
So what does this all mean for the individual listener? The only way to stop the next reset, according to this belief system, is for the population to consciously unify and rise to a higher vibration.
And this is achieved through simple but powerful means: improving diet, ensuring adequate sleep, engaging in regular exercise, meditating to find calm.
And most importantly, consciously letting go of hate and manufactured negativity.
It fundamentally emphasizes collective power. It suggests that massive unified boycotts like refusing to shop on Amazon or collectively refusing to work would be enough to dismantle the entire parasitic structure.
Because that structure is inherently fragile when confronted by collective high vibrational awareness.
The overriding message of these final chapters is crystal clear. The history we've been given is a deliberate, manufactured set of lies designed to keep us compliant and isolated.
And the current reality is simply a repeating script of control and depopulation, which is evolving from physical extermination methods to advanced digital and biological control.
Ponder for a moment. If our history is a set of agreed-upon lies, how much of our present reality, from the sudden anomalous arrival of electricity and the suppression of the ether to the modern digital control structure and the 5G rollout, is simply a repeating script written long ago?
written by the hands of an elite determined to maintain their parasitic control.
We hope this deep dive into the final chapters of this comprehensive history provides you with a profound amount to consider.
And perhaps inspires you to look closer at the world around you. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.
If you found this information thought-provoking and want to continue exploring the hidden timeline of the world, be sure to subscribe to our channel.